This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate first part of What If Naruto was raised by Dante by Sarutobi's request. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Not wasting no more time, let's start the story.
A hero's body brought two men together. One appeared worn out and elderly. One looked proud and youthful. In the arms of the elderly man was a baby. The younger one was staring at the older one as if he were completely crazy. The child cried out, "You've got to be fucking kidding me." He wore a red trench coat that was open to reveal a mostly bare chest, save for black, fingerless gloves, dark brown, baggy pants, black boots, and a brown leather strap that ran across his chest. He had bleach white hair. Pistols were the odd-looking devices he called the holsters that hung from his belt. Additionally, a rather ornate-looking arrangement of leather straps supported his unique claymore, Rebellion, on his back. The old man said, "Please, Dante, think for a moment." "No way, Sarutobi," Dante cut in. "I can't raise a goddamn kid, not even for you," he added firmly, adding, "I hunt demons for a living." Sarutobi let out a sigh. He had come ready to play dirty, anticipating this response. "Do you know exactly what the Yondaime did to the boy?" Dante's eyebrows went up. He sealed the Kyuubi in the kid. The elderly man gave him a direct look. It's true that the sealing method could have worked. But what happens if the seal gets broken? Or breaks open on its own? Or the boy succumbs to the whisperings that the demon would use to seduce its jailer into releasing it? Minato thought that there were too many variables. So, he did something far more permanent. Sarutobi gave Dante an important look. The youth took a deep breath. "Impossible." Sarutobi gave a pitiful smile. Minato always detested that specific word. After researching sealing extensively and creating a seal that was strong enough to complete the task, he decided to see if he could come up with a substitute. As you can see, his seal was designed with the knowledge that he would be using a newborn child in order to allow its immature chakra coils to adapt to the Kyuubi's chakra. The demonic chakra would be leaking into the child's system through the seal, changing it into human chakra as it went and adding it to the child's stores. Additionally, the container could directly access the Kyuubi's own chakra if necessary. Unfortunately, since the demon would be the source of this chakra, it could use it to subtly change the child's thoughts, though this is unlikely. He thought he had found the solution when he met you, Dante, a half-demon, who possessed demonic energy that doesn't change them when they use it because nothing is trying to change you. It's your power, not a demon's borrowed power. He started researching and experimenting 10 times more ferociously than before, using his seal as a starting point. He ate very little. He didn't get any sleep. There was a moment of silence as Sarutobi and Dante both had solemn expressions. He wasn't there when his own son was born, or when his wife died. When I told him, he was devastated. However, he informed me that he had succeeded. For want of a better word, he had managed to create a half-demon. He claimed to have taken the most fundamental component of the seal, the one that actually sealed, and made some adjustments. Modified it, Dante blurted. He said that instead of sealing the Kyuubi into the boy's mind, he would aim for the boy's soul, Sarutobi said with a slight smile as he nodded. After that, he would be able to combine the child's soul with the Kyuubi by simply adding more power. But the amount of power needed to do that, Dante, that's why he passed away. He opened all 8 celestial gates and took 5 soldier pills just before he hurried out. He died to save not just the village but also his son's life. Dante winced as Sarutobi turned to face him with a beseeching expression. "Please, Dante. I can't trust anyone else with him but you. There have been a lot of deaths in the village today. I'm worried about people's reactions. And here, he had no one to help him manage his power. However, you can. Please." With a heavy sigh, Dante turned to face Sarutobi, who had been holding the baby, who had been sleeping the entire time. Dante extended his arms, and the elderly man grinned, said, "Thank you," and gave him the child. "What is the name of the child?" Dante inquired. "Naruto." Sarutobi grinned. Dante was adjusting the baby in his arms when he noticed the 3 marks on each cheek that appeared to be whiskers. Then the baby started to stir, and Dante found himself looking into crimson eyes with slightly slit pupils. If he had described them to someone, they might have sounded a little scary, but they were filled with the innocence of a newborn child, illuminated by the smile that now adorned the baby's face. The baby made a few happy baby noises, yawned, and fell back asleep. The old man turned to go, saying over his shoulder, "I would like to know how he's doing from time to time, if it wouldn't be too much trouble." Dante blinked a few times and glanced up at Sarutobi, who was standing there smiling warmly. Dante wondered what the hell he had just agreed to as he blinked a couple more times, glanced back down at the baby in his arms, shrugged, and turned to return to his home in the west. He hadn't changed his clothes much in 12 years, save for a black shirt under his trench coat, and he was holding a letter signed by none other than the Sandaime Hokage of Konoha, asking him to return to Konoha and help the village as he had done in the past. As he walked down the road lined on both sides with lush, green trees, Dante was reminded of how beautiful nature could be, something he didn't get to see much of in the West, as industrialized as the area was. However, this time would be different because he had a companion. His son, Naruto, walked beside him. Although Naruto was officially adopted, the boy had stated when he was just 6 years old that it didn't matter that Dante wasn't his biological father because Dante had raised, trained, and cared for him for 12 years. If that's not a father, Naruto had said. Since the day Dante had made the decision to take him back to the West, the child had grown significantly in all aspects, physically, mentally, and in terms of ability. He was now a good 5 feet tall, with an athlete's build, his frame cut with lean, hard muscle, without being particularly bulky. This was due to the intense training that Dante had forced upon him. Naruto kept his bright blonde hair fairly short, but they had found early on that it was completely untamable, so he left it spiky, the points pointing in all directions. The 3 whisker marks on his cheeks had become a little ragged over time, and the only thing that had remained was his eyes, 2 crimmered orbs with a slightly slit, like a fox's. In terms of color scheme, Naruto's outfit wasn't all that different from Dante's, and he discovered that he also liked darker hues. He wore a light black jacket over a dark red t-shirt, navy blue jeans, black boots, and black, fingerless gloves with metal plates on the hands. Additionally, he wore a black leather belt with a holster on each hip that held one of 2 special pistols that his father had made for him for his 10th birthday. One was painted a dull gold, which he had named Dawn, and the other was painted completely black, which he had named Dusk. Lastly, a different type of holster, composed of black leather straps, exactly like Dante's, and held the force-edged sword, which Dante had entrusted to Naruto after a incident with Dante's brother, Virgil. Naruto thought that guy was pretty screwed up. Dante interrupted his train of thought by saying, "Look sharp, kid, we're just about there." Looking up, Naruto's eyes widened as he saw 2 enormous gates, both of which were open, allowing him to see the beginnings of the city inside. He then looked farther up, at the massive tower at the back of the city, before turning to the right and seeing a large rock face, actually, 4 of them. At his son's expression, Dante laughed lightly and asked, "How do you feel about the large village of Konoha?" he inquired. With an expression of disbelief, Naruto turned to face him and said, Village." This time, Dante laughed aloud. "Yeah, well, that's what they like to call it," he said. "This is the Hidden Leaf Village, Konoha. It most likely began as a village before simply expanding. However, changing the name as it expanded would have likely been very difficult, so they chose to stick with village." After shaking his head, Naruto turned back to face the city and village and grinned, saying, "So, this is where I was born, huh? Looks like a good place to be," he said. "Yeah, it's a pretty nice place," Dante said, his smile tinged with sadness as he recalled the day his 2 friends had passed away, one having died while bringing Konoha salvation, the other while carrying it out. Delicious food, fascinating people, etc. Upon arriving at the gate, father and son were greeted by a man wearing a dark green flak jacket. Naruto recalled Dante telling him this, so he thought, this guy is a ninja. The man didn't look particularly impressive, but based on his movements, Naruto could tell that he was fairly experienced in combat, and the fact that he was wearing a flak jacket suggested that he was a mid-level ninja, a Chunin. The Chunin said courteously, "Names and business in Konoha, please," but the sight of their weapons in plain view made him tense. The 3rd Hokage's letter was given to the ninja by Dante, who said, "Dante and his son, Naruto, here at the request of the Hokage." After reading the letter, the Chunin realized that the seal at the bottom of the page was, in fact, the Hokage's seal. "You'll have to go see the Hokage now," he said, nodding, "if you'll accompany me." With Naruto a step behind him, Dante said, "No need," as he passed the Chunin. "I've been here before." After a moment of blinking, the Chunin shrugged and went back to watching the gates. Naruto just stayed as close as he could, taking in all the various people and buildings as they passed, and soon realized that many were staring at him and his father, but mostly at him, as Dante led him through the streets of Konoha as though he had lived there his entire life. Dante glanced at his son, who appeared a little disturbed by the stares he was receiving. "Don't worry about them, Naruto." Naruto looked up, startled by his father's voice interrupting his thoughts. "But you're not the Kyuubi," Dante said, turning to face his son. "It's probably not every day they see someone with eyes that remind them of the demon that nearly destroyed their village. They'll move past it." "Thanks, Dad," Naruto replied with a smile of his own, Then he saw that they were getting closer to the big tower he had seen earlier. "Is that where the Hokage resides?" he inquired. His father laughed softly and shook his head, saying, "No, the Hokage tower is that. The Hokage works there and keeps watch over the village. However, he doesn't truly reside there. It's got nothing on the Temen.ni.gru, Naruto remarked, snorting as he gazed up at the massive building. Dante discovered that he had to concur. He finally had an excuse to take a break from battling his worst enemy, paperwork, when the intercom buzzed to life. The woman on the other end of the intercom said, "Hokage Sama, you have visitors." The intercom then clicked off. The door opened as he stood flexing his aging muscles, and Dante and a young, blonde boy with red eyes entered. The boy's eye color did not disturb Sarutobi in the least. He recognized him right away. "You must be this Naruto I've heard so much about from Dante," he said, approaching the young man and holding out his hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Naruto accepted the old man's hand with a smile, but there was a hint of doubt in his eyes. This elderly man was supposed to be the strongest ninja in the village, and he should have been sitting on his porch, shouting at young whippersnappers to leave his lawn. Well, Naruto told himself, appearances aren't everything. Naruto remarked, "It's nice to meet you too, old man." Sweating profusely, Sarutobi gave Dante a sardonic look. With his hands raised in defense, Dante said, "Hey, I've had more important things to teach him than crazy stuff like being polite." If not for the playful sparkle in his eyes, Naruto's expression toward the Sandaime would have been entirely innocent. "What? Did I make a mistake?" He said, "I rest my case, Dante." "It's good to see that some things don't change," Sarutobi said, shaking his head and laughing before offering Dante his hand, which was quickly taken. "And seeing you, my old friend, is even more pleasant." In an offended tone, Dante said, "Hey, I'm not that old." He then smiled, adding, "It's good to see you too, Sarutobi." "Please, have a seat, you two," the Sandaime said, smiling back and pointing to a few chairs in front of his desk. "There's a lot to talk about." "I'm about to trust the both of you with an S-class secret," Sarutobi said as soon as the three sat down, adding that the information must remain inside the room. Naruto shut his mouth after learning what S-class probably meant. Before continuing, Sarutobi collected himself, unsure whether he should trust this information with a 12-year-old, but Dante had made it clear in his response to the Sandaime's letter that Naruto was not to be excluded. In recent years, a new hidden village has emerged. It is called Otto, the Hidden Sound Village, Sarutobi said, and normally this would be of no concern. However, we didn't know who its leader was until just a year ago. As it happens, the Otokage is a man by the name of Orochimaru. "No way, that loony has his own village now?" Dante raised his eyebrows. "Now it," the Sandaime said, nodding. Naruto exclaimed, "Whoa, hold on a second. Orochimaru is from this village, right?" He was certain that his father had told about that man in one of the stories, so he asked, his face contorted in contemplation. Sarutobi remarked with a hint of melancholy, that he is, Naruto, adding that he is both one of the greatest traders and ninja this village has ever produced. Additionally, it appears that he is still determined to destroy Konoha. "He's still hung up after losing to Minato?" Dante snorted. Sarutobi shrugged and said, "It doesn't matter what his motivations are. This leads us to the issue at hand," he stated. "What matters is doing everything we can to stop him. Unsettling information has been discovered by our spies. Orochimaru appears to have maintained communication with Suna, the Hidden Sand Village." Sarutobi inhaled deeply and said, "Oto and Suna are planning to invade Konoha. Suna has been losing business to us over the years, and they're getting pretty desperate." Dante's eyes squinted. "Are you certain? Suna and Konoha are allies, aren't they?" "They are becoming desperate, as I have stated. Maybe they think that by eliminating us, they can significantly raise their own profile and start earning money once more." It made sense to Dante, so he nodded. "We'll be holding the Chunin exams in a little more than a year, though I can't guarantee the precise date. There will be participation from numerous villages. I know it seems like a long way off, and to be asking you to start staying now seems foolish, but I need all the time I can get to prepare, and I must know what resources I have to work with," he said, looking directly into Dante's eyes. "It would be an excellent chance for them to strike, to show their strength to everyone else. Of course, you'll have a place to live and money." As Dante put it, "Whoa, you're talking like you think we'll say no or something. We'll help, of course. Naruto, correct?" "You're right." With a sly smile on his face, Naruto remarked, "Just tell us what to do, and we'll take care of it. Besides, this looks like a pretty cool place," he said, giving the Sandaime a thumbs up. He enthusiastically added, I'm eager to see what the East is truly like. Thank you, both of you, Sarutobi said with a weary smile. Now, he added, reaching under his desk and bringing up a few folders, we have to make arrangements for you too. This is the deed to your new house, he said, passing Dante one of the folders. It's been put away for a rainy day. Dante's eyebrows almost leapt out of his face as he opened the folder and glanced at the charming story house in the photo that was placed over the actual deed. You're kidding. Minato wouldn't mind at all, do you think? Sarutobi inquired. Accepting the old man's kindness, Dante simply shook his head and blinked. And I'm going to institute you as a Jonin in Konoha's ninja forces, Dante, so you won't get bored while you're here. You'll have to find a way to earn money while you're here, after all. Thanks, old man, Dante said after a minute of staring. Naruto straightened up a little when Sarutobi turned to face him and said, as for you, I imagine you're not exactly going to like this, but I want to place you in the Ninja Academy. The Academy of Ninjas? Uncertain, Naruto uttered those words. Now hold on a second. You want to enroll my son in the academy? Shouted Dante. You want to stick with academy students when he could take out any of the best chunin in the village, including most likely some of your jonin? He cried out. Calm down, Dante, please. Sarutobi calmly said, I have my reasons, anticipating this dispute. I'm listening, declared Naruto, who was sincerely interested in the academy. After hearing what his son had to say, Dante appeared prepared to argue further but changed his mind. Well, Naruto, young children start learning about being a ninja at the academy. The majority begin around age 6 and graduate around age 13. If you accepted my offer, I would put you in the graduating class for the following year. A closer look at the chunin exams, Naruto said, nodding in comprehension. Additionally, since I'd be a Dante said, Genin, with a hint of bitterness. A Genin, I'd be able to enter the chunin exams, and keep a better eye on things happening during the exam itself, Naruto said, disregarding his father's tone. Well done, Naruto, the Sandaime commended, that's exactly what I'd had in mind. Sarutobi and Dante both grinned at Naruto's insight. In addition, you would be able to interact with people your own age and gain a better understanding of our culture here. You had me at, well done, old man, Naruto said, flashing him that same sly smile. You got a good bargain. Sarutobi grinned once more and said, great. I'll organize the paperwork. Tomorrow is when you'll begin. In the morning, I'll send someone to take you there. But now you'd better go settle down, he said. Dante said, sounds good to me, getting up from his seat. Are you ready, Naruto? The boy said, yep, and rose from his seat. Well then, Sarutobi, I guess this means I'll have to come back here in the morning, Dante replied. Sarutobi gave a nod. You'll need to come to me for missions every morning, unless I've said otherwise, or you're already on one. Ah well, Dante sighed, and walked to the door with Naruto at his heels. At least I'll be getting paid regularly. After leaving, they shut the door. Naruto stared at the house in front of him, thinking, this is where the house I was born in. The house was very simple, made of wood, painted a darker shade of green, and had an old, plain door. Well, Dante said, let's see how well they've kept it clean. His father inhaled deeply next to him. With Naruto right behind him, Dante approached the door of his deceased friend's home, used the key Sarutobi had given him to open it, and entered. With a couch a few feet in front of them, a rather large coffee table a couple of feet in front of that, a fireplace a few feet in front of that, and comfortable chairs on either side of the coffee table, the interior was as charming as the exterior. There were doors on the right and left sides of the living room itself, as well as on either side of the fireplace. Dante gestured toward the two doors beside the fireplace and said, bedrooms. He then pointed to the right door and said, kitchen. He then turned to Naruto and said, bathroom, he inquired. He received a thumbs up from Naruto, who said, got it, Dad. Dante said, good, and then he yawned. Well, I'm going to catch some Z's. He waved at Naruto and went to the left bedroom. Do what you like, he said. After a few weeks of travel, Naruto thought it would be nice to sleep in a real bed, so he shrugged and went to the right bedroom after watching his father leave. Someone was hammering on the door of Naruto's new, minimalist bedroom when he woke up. Awaken, child. From the other side, his father's voice said, your escort has arrived. The escort? Who was he? Naruto realized, oh shit, the academy. And practically jumped out of bed to put on his clothes from the previous day. He briefly debated whether or not to bring his weapons, but he decided against it because, although it was a ninja school, it was still a school, and he didn't think they would want him to walk in looking like he was looking for a fight. He left dawn, dusk, and his jacket, which still had force edge strapped to it, on the nightstand where he had laid them. Took you long enough, Dante said, pointing out that Naruto was without his weapons. Probably a good idea, he said, hooking a thumb at the door. Now get going. He grinned at his son and said, and good luck with your first day. He had just emerged from the bedroom. Thanks, and same to you, Naruto replied with a smile of his own. Hinata was becoming more anxious by the moment. To start, she was being escorted by a new woman instead of her usual Hyuga escort, which didn't bother her at all. The woman was friendly, but when she learned that they had to pick up someone else, a new student, no less, she discovered that they had already covered a lot of ground. Did this person already have ninja training? How would they react to her? Would they even notice her presence? In her baggy blue pants, shinobi sandals, and thick beige jacket with her clan symbol on the back, she shifted uneasily. She looked up at her escort and jumped a little when she felt a soft hand on her arm. Kurenai told her, Hinata-chan, don't be so anxious, I'm sure th. The door opened, interrupting her, and a small boy appeared in the doorway, wearing a dark red shirt, navy blue jeans, black boots, and black, fingerless gloves with metal plates on the backs. He had blonde hair that was almost as bright as the sun, was very lean and athletic, had odd freckles on his cheeks that looked like whiskers, and had crimson eyes that were filled with a warmth and confidence that surprised Kurenai. The boy was so attractive, Hinata thought, blushing at the thought, and she couldn't take her eyes off of him. Hi, the boy said, holding up his hand with a foxy grin, I'm Naruto. He closed the door behind him and looked at Kurenai. Are you the escort, the old Hokage was going to send? That's me, Kurenai said with a smile to the boy. You and Hinata-chan will be walking to the academy today, and my name is Yuhi Kurenai. Naruto-san, it's good to meet you, she said kindly. Looking at her doubtfully, Naruto said, well, it's good to meet you too, but where is this Hinata person? Kurenai blinked and then turned to face the girl who was pressed against her back. Hinata, she said gently, don't be so shy. Make an introduction. Looking out from behind Kurenai, Hinata saw crimson eyes, like the sky at dawn, and she tried to speak, failed, tried again, got the same result, and quickly went back to hiding. The girl's odd behavior caused Naruto to raise an eyebrow, thinking, man, either I'm really scary, or she's really shy. After Hinata squealed in protest, Kurenai reached around and dragged her out from behind. Come now, Hinata-chan, is that how a lady should act? She questioned her youthful charge. In an attempt to speak, Hinata stood and shamefully pressed her two forefingers together. Hey there, nice to meet you, Naruto said, his foxy grin returning, and he put his hands behind his head in a very confident gesture before saying, name's Naruto. Naruto saved her the trouble of speaking first. My n.name I.ish Hyuga H Hinata, she stammered out, silently cursing herself for her terrible stutter and hoping he hated her for it. She looked up at him, wondering why her face was heating up even faster than usual. Well, Naruto told himself, she's really shy, but she's not really shy. Kurenai grinned and said, all right, now that we've been introduced, how about we get you two to the academy? The two children on either side of her fell into step as she started down the street. The Jonin found it adorable that Hinata kept glancing at Naruto while they were walking, and she could see the onset of a crush. As she considered what it would be like to see them start dating, a question came to her. She called out to the blonde, Naruto-san, and asked, what's your last name? It's not something I think I caught. He appeared to consider it for a moment. He knew he had a surname because his father had told him who his biological parents were, but he said, I don't have one, and then, in response to Kurenai's questioning gaze, he added, my dad doesn't use one. I haven't heard him use one, anyway. I don't have one, as far as I'm aware. After analyzing his response, Kurenai said, did your father adopt you, Naruto? Yep, said Naruto cheerfully. Kurenai said, prepared to end the conversation there. W. What H? Happened to Y? Your real page parents, and Naruto. But someone else wasn't, Hinata inquired. His response was, Dad told me that they were killed. Kurenai glanced at the boy, a little taken aback by how casually he mentioned the death of his parents. And that doesn't bother you? She inquired. He said, not really, adding, it may sound awful, but I never really knew my parents. I'm not sure what kind of people they were because I've never met them. I'm content with my adoptive father, but I regret not getting to know them. Even though he was aware of their deaths and Dante had told him stories about them, he didn't feel a genuine sense of loss, aside from the fact that the world had lost such wonderful people. That's all I really need to know, he told his friends, and it was true enough. After the three of them sat in silence for a few minutes, thinking about what Naruto had told them, Kurenai finally said, "Here we are." The big, dome-shaped structure in front of them caught Naruto's attention. "Hinata," she said, "send Naruto to your guy's classroom." Kurenai turned and started to leave. "I'll return at the end of the day to pick you up." Hinata flushed, wondering if Naruto would want her to walk with him the rest of the way or if she would be walking alone. She glanced at the boy next to her, who was grinning at her. He said to her, "Lead the way, Hinata," his red eyes adding warmth to her face. All right," she said in agreement. Hinata said, "Here at I.is," as she stood in front of a door, grabbed the knob, and opened the door to their classroom, entering first and holding it open. "Thanks," Naruto said to Hinata as he entered the room, but as soon as he did, he noticed that almost everyone was staring at him, and he looked around to say, "Hi." He waved his hand before entering. He could have listened to any one of the hushed conversations that broke out in the class right away, but instead he turned to Hinata and said, "Hey, do you mind if I sit with you? There is no one else that I know." This day was getting better and better. Hinata blushed again. Sure, she stammered. He wanted to sit with her. "Who's the new guy? He's pretty hot, guy like. A girl like her, what's with those eyes, and have some kind of bloodline?" were some of the conversations that Naruto heard as he walked down the aisle, trailing behind her as she took her seat. He could be defeated by Satan. They had never seen him fight, so how in the world did they know who could or couldn't defeat him? That last comment truly baffled him. At last, Hinata sat down close to the back of the room, and Naruto sat next to her. Hinata blushed more at the proximity, and Naruto saw that her face had turned red in the last few minutes. "Hey, Hinata," he said, his voice laced with concern, "are you sick? Should I take you to the doctor? It looks like you have a fever." Hinata was unable to respond with words and could only shake her head. Before Naruto could say anything more, the door opened again and two girls, one with pink hair and the other with blonde hair similar to Naruto's, rushed into the room, practically screaming at each other. "Get out of here, Ino.pig. Sasuke.kun is mine," cried the pink one. "He has no interest in pig-headed, obnoxious blondes." She turned to face a lone boy by the window who had raven black hair. "Are you Sasuke.kun?" With stars in her eyes, she asked him. The fact that Sasuke didn't even blink, let alone answer, made Naruto perspire, and when the two girls started arguing again, with apparently louder volume, no less, he almost flinched. "Does this occur on a daily basis?" Hinata nodded when he asked her. He shot her a sardonic glance before turning back to face the two yelling girls. Son of a bye, he would have to hear this nearly every day for the next year. His curse was interrupted when the door opened again and a man wearing one of those deep green flak jackets, a scar across his nose, and his black hair pulled back in a ponytail entered. As he said, "Good morning, class," the class said, "Good morning, Iruka Sensei," and Naruto was startled to see that the two girls who had been fighting when the man had arrived were now seated separately and had responded in the same tone as everyone else. He thought, like some kind of cult, and became even more cautious about the fact that he would be there for a whole year. "Today, everyone, we have the honor of accepting a new student," the instructor said, surveying the room. "How about you come down here and introduce yourself?" As he stood and walked down the aisle, Naruto felt like everyone was watching him. When he reached the teacher's desk, Iruka saw his eyes, and a moment of fear flashed through his face, but it vanished so fast that Naruto believed he could have imagined it. After quickly gathering his thoughts, Iruka said, "Son, why don't you tell us your name?" He turned to the class and said, "Hey there, my name's Naruto, and, before turning to face Iruka with the eyes that had plagued his dreams for years. "How about you tell us where you came from, and why you decided to try and become a ninja?" the teacher asked after appearing to pause for a moment to think. After giving the class a shrug, Naruto said, "I'm from a city in the west." Everyone in the classroom gasped. "Oh my god, that's really spooky," Naruto thought. Naruto went on, and, well, the Sandaime had wanted him to be able to compete in the Chunin exams so that he could keep an eye out for traitors and the like, but he was obviously unable to tell them that, so he went with, "My dad's been teaching me his own fighting styles, and I figured that ninja training would be a good supplement to my already existing skills." Sure enough, he thought. Well then, thank you, Naruto," Iruka replied behind him. "Just stay there and form a line, because we're starting with taijutsu practice." Naruto sighed, thinking, now this is just ridiculous, as the students hurried to the door in a perfect single file line. It's getting really hard to keep getting creeped out by the cult. Like, hive mind thing they've got going. I mean, come on, wait, what's taijutsu? Naruto grinned at the enormous ring before him, realizing that it was Taijutsu. One student, wearing a red suit and a little on the plump side, and the other, wearing a gray, hooded jacket and smelling strongly of dog, were positioned on either side of Iruka as he stood in the middle of the ring. "Start!" Iruka shouted and leapt to the side right away. The dog guy simply wore down the larger one, but Naruto had observed that the dog boy lacked refinement, as he essentially slugged the big one a number of times until he went down. The fat guy, he had to admit, put up a pretty good fight, but whatever style he used depended on his strength and weight, and the dog-scented combatant was also strong and quick. "Whatever works, I guess," he thought. As he walked out of the ring, the gray-coated one gave him a slight glare, to which Naruto simply raised an eyebrow. What the devil is wrong with him? For a few minutes, it continued this way. Iruka would call a few students, and they would fight, but not for very long, and he would call a couple more. None of the fights were particularly interesting to Naruto, and they only involved a few punches or kicks. Then, when the teacher called Hinata and Hananoki, Hinata turned to face a slender, average height girl with mahogany hair cut just below her chin and a strikingly blue set of eyes. The girl was wearing a forest green dress that reached the middle of her calves, had no sleeves, had slits down the sides that started around mid-thigh, and was occasionally adorned with light blue flowers. Start. Although Hinata's style was very effective, the fight was fairly one-sided, and Naruto felt that something was wrong throughout. Hinata appeared to be very uncomfortable with the way she fought, as evidenced by her rigid form and her apparent restriction of movement, even though it was unnatural. The other girl, Hananoki, didn't fight. Rather, her performance was just mediocre. "Now," shouted Iruka, Naruto and Sasuke. When Sasuke's name was called, a sizable group of girls cheered so loudly that Naruto nearly missed his own. However, as soon as he entered the ring, a flurry of excitement erupted among the other student sections. It seemed that they were eager to see what the new kid could accomplish. It didn't take Naruto long to think of what Dante would do in this circumstance. He would brag. "I'll make you proud, Dad," he thought. Entering the ring, Sasuke glared at Naruto, saying, "You have to fight the new kid? He'll wipe the floor with him." He wasn't going to take this seriously, was he? Well, more fun for me. Naruto smirked at his opponent's bored expression. Start. Sasuke was determined to put an end to this so he could return to more important things, like ignoring his fangirls, so he ran straight at Naruto. The nerve. It was as if he truly believed he could win. Then I guess I'll just have to prove him wrong, he told himself. The new guy just stood there, grinning as if he knew something that Sasuke didn't. Sasuke threw a jumping spin kick at Naruto's face, but it missed when he tilted his head back an inch. Using his momentum, he fell into a sweep kick, and Naruto jumped in place, his legs inches above the kick. Sasuke then used the opportunity to rise into an uppercut that was aimed at Naruto's stomach. He caught Sasuke's fist with both hands, then twisted the raven-haired boy's hand to the left, while he stepped right. Unexpected, Sasuke was thrown into the air, spinning multiple times before landing hard. The audience members let out a lot of gasps. With a small laugh, Naruto said, "Oh, I'm sorry, dude. It appeared to be painful, I'm sorry." With a bloody lip and a hint of wounded pride, Sasuke stood up. HMPH. Not too bad. However, you ought to give up now. The fangirls on the sidelines started yelling about how awesome he was, but he was determined not to show it. "Before I start getting serious," he said as casually as he could. The truth was that the fall had hurt a lot. This time, Naruto burst out laughing. The man with the bleeding lip says. He continued to laugh as he said, "I should forfeit just so I don't have to waste any more of my time." In less than a second, Sasuke went from being irritated to furious. "You're mocking me? I am a member of the elite, Uchiha." He hurried Naruto once more and yelled, "And I'm going to wipe that freaking smirk right off your face." When Sasuke's fist came sailing at him again, Naruto didn't try anything fancy. He just presented the back of his fist and held it. Naruto's smirk remained unfazed, and he caught the fist Sasuke had sent flying towards him and threw Sasuke straight into the air. He waited a few seconds, then sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the Uchiha, who had landed on both feet after righting himself in mid-air. Sasuke heard a cracking sound and felt a sharp pain in his right hand. He looked at the offended appendage and saw that it had struck the plated back of his opponent's glove rather than Naruto's face as it should have. He jumped back, holding his injured knuckles in his other hand, but fortunately nothing felt broken. Naruto's smile never faltered, but after that cracking sound, he felt a little uneasy because he didn't want to hurt the other child too much. The unease subsided when Sasuke flexed his fingers, seemingly recovered. The final Uchiha frowned. Now that hurts, he thought, but he should probably get that checked out later. He looked up at his opponent, who was still smirking and mocking his previous promise to wipe that smirk off Naruto's face. I severely underestimated him, he admitted, adding that the boy had retaliated against all of his attacks. Of course you can, he firmly informed himself. You're a Uchiha. You're not gonna let some upstart foreigner get the best of you, are you? He was still unsure. Naijutsu was obviously good. If only they were allowed to use ninjutsu as well. He had hurt the Uchiha's pride enough for one day, and Naruto was growing bored while Sasuke battled doubt. Perhaps he should just end this. Naruto decided it was his turn to hurry Sasuke. Naruto appeared to vanish, then he was directly in front of Sasuke's face, and then he was struck in the stomach with a battering ram. He flew across the room, and his back slammed against the wall. He was well outside the ring. Sasuke only dimly realized that Naruto had struck Sasuke with his fist rather than a battering ram. No way. After giving Sasuke one more glance, Naruto turned to leave the ring. He had just defeated the last Uchiha without even sweating, and everyone was staring at him with open mouths. Some of the girls were giving him looks that would have burned him alive if he had been any closer, but others were staring at him with hearts and stars in their eyes. Little did he know that the Naruto fan club had just been formed. The entire fight had been watched in amazement by Hinata, who thought, if only I could be more like him. Naruto was not only attractive, kind, and self-assured, but he was also able to support his confidence with amazing skill. Only a few feet away, Naruto said, "Hey, Hinata," and she jumped. "Whoops, sorry," he said, placing a hand behind his head and smiling, his eyes closed. "Didn't mean to startle you so much." His eyes were closed, so he was unable to see the intense flush on her face or the glares some of the girls were now giving her. With some trepidation, he opened his eyes and said, do you mind if I ask you a sort of personal question?" She realized now how different it was from when he put both hands behind his head. When both were there, he looked very relaxed and confident. With just one, he actually looked a little nervous. "I mean, you don't have to answer if you don't feel comfortable," but, he trailed off, looking away now, his hand still behind his head. Naruto, of course. She stumbled back. "You see, can ask whatever you want." "Well, it's about the way you fight," Naruto said with a smile. Before she could stop them, possibilities started to flood her mind. What could he say about her fighting style? The most prominent and depressing of these was that he was going to ask her why she was so awful. After her own family made fun of her incapacity to use the gentle fist, Naruto was going to follow suit. However, before those thoughts could truly impact her. "Who taught you that style, and why? I don't mean to bother you in any way." With sincere interest in his tone, Naruto inquired. She blinked. Didn't he know? Her eyes were pretty hard to misidentify, and then she remembered that he was from the West and that he had only arrived yesterday, based on what Kurenai had previously told her, so it was unlikely that he was familiar with her clan. Iruka called up a few more pupils before she could start her explanation, saying, "Gisei and Raiden. A.N. Before anyone responds. "No, it's not Raiden from Mortal Kombat." "Oh," Naruto uttered in disappointment. "How about we hold off until we get a break or something?" She suppressed a sigh and said, all right," feeling a little let down because she had finally found someone who genuinely wanted to talk to her, and now they were being interrupted. As Naruto examined the fighters, he noticed that Gisei, the one on the right, was rather stocky for his age, but he had muscle rather than fat, a round face, bright red hair, and deep brown eyes. He was wearing a tan tank top, baggy brown pants, and black shinobi sandals. Gisei appeared to be very serious, and he instantly dropped into a fighting stance. The polar opposite of Naruto, Raiden was built very much like him. He was about 5 feet tall, lean, and muscular, with short jet black hair that was slicked back and eyes the color of perfectly cut amethysts. He wore a tight black t-shirt with the kanji for storm embroidered on the chest, black jeans, and black shinobi sandals. As he entered the ring, more feminine cries rang out from the audience. "Damn, more of these obsessing women." Naruto thought to himself, it's like there are whole freaking fan clubs, or something. He glanced at Hinata and reminded himself that she wasn't like that. Almost immediately, it was over. Gisei was almost on top of Raiden, moving too quickly for someone so big, and then Raiden was behind Gisei, his elbow where Gisei's neck had been, now tumbling to the ground with glassy eyes. "Hinata," he said, attracting the shy girl's attention. "Who is that guy?" "Holy shit," Naruto thought, a ferocious smile slowly spreading across his face. Well, Hinata said, glancing at Raiden. His name is Hitaki R. Raiden. Hitaki K. Kakashi reportedly adopted him, but I've heard that they're more like B. brothers than anything else. Additionally, he is extremely skilled at everything. She said to him, much better than Sasuke, though many are hesitant to admit it, as the subject of their conversation left the ring. Naruto kept grinning and said, I can't wait to fight him, with a tone of eager anticipation. Hinata looked up at him, blinking. Why? UW. Want to fight him? But he just saw what happened to that Gisei, didn't he? She inquired. Crimson eyes stared at her as if she were completely insane. Are you serious? Yes, of course I do, he replied. That would be a lot of fun, he spoke with passion in each sentence. B. But, why? You might lose, she said, instantly regretting the words she had chosen. I am mean, N. Not that why. You would. With a raised eyebrow, Naruto said, what if I lose? In the worst case scenario, I should intensify my training. I have everything to gain and nothing to lose. In any case, I get to test myself against someone I've never fought before, have a good fight, and have a good time overall. Then he shrugged, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. Seems like a pretty good deal to me. And if I win, then I get the satisfaction of victory to go along with all that, he told her. Hinata was in awe. Naruto had given her a lot to think about, and even though she hadn't known him for very long, she had always been terrified of losing because that was what her family detested. However, to Naruto, losing didn't matter because you still gained something. Alright. Great job everyone, Iruka replied. Now, let's head outside to work on our accuracy. Everyone hurried to line up again, leaving Naruto to think, but, I didn't bring Dawn or Dusk with me. Naruto came to the conclusion that this was likely going to be awful. Dante entered the Hokage's office and said, hey, old man, did you mention that you were paid yesterday? There were 3 other people in the room with him and the Sandame, he thought as he looked around. 2 of them, a black-haired woman with red eyes and a black-haired man with a cigarette in his mouth, were staring at him as if he were crazy, while the third was a man with silver hair, a face mask, and a headband pulled down around his left eye. Dante thought, that guy looks kind of familiar, as he stared at the silver-haired man. Hey there, guys and gal, he said, ignoring the nagging familiarity. What's up? Dante, he said, greeting the white-haired man with a smile, you're just in time. In order to continue with the introductions, kindly come over here. The head of the silver-haired Jonin sprang up. Dante? He said, perplexed. The Jonin turned to face him, and Dante instantly recognized him after catching sight of his single eye. When Dante saw his old friend's most gifted pupil, he smiled and said, well, hey there, Kakashi. You haven't left me behind, have you? He said as he approached the young man and held out his hand. With one eye, Kakashi managed to smile as she took his hand. Hey, like I could ever forget that particular beating, she said. It's definitely good to you again, he remarked jokingly. The other 2 Jonin nearly fell to the ground as Kakashi, the notorious copy ninja, was discussing what must have been a humiliating defeat in a casual manner while they could hear him. The Hokage told me what happened, Kakashi said, a little uneasy, his face growing a little more serious. If you're here, then. Dante laughed. Yeah, I'll be sure to introduce you to I am when I get the chance. Kakashi grinned once more and said, I'm excited about it. I will make sure to bring my younger brother along. Dante was the next to be taken aback. Huh? He uttered those words. Oh, did you miss it? He scratched the back of his head and said, it's kind of a long story, and Kakashi vaguely told him, I adopted 2, well, sort of. As Dante was about to say something, Sarutobi said, consider it your joint mission to get reacquainted. Return at the end of the day for your pay. Well, it seems that you 2 have much to discuss, he said, paging through the papers on his desk. I don't really have anything here that can't be taken care of by a team of Chunin or Kurenai and Asuma here, so I'll let the both of you have a day off, he said, laughing. Dante looked at Kakashi and said, well, you heard the Hokage, closing his mouth after saying that he truly needed the money he would receive from a mission. Let's leave this place. His one-eyed companion fell in step with him as he made his way to the door, saying, I need to see if that old ramen stand is still around. Without saying another word, they left, leaving Kurenai and Asuma speechless and staring after them. And Naruto was correct. As he threw, he became more conscious that his turn was coming after observing the other students toss 5 kunai and 5 shuriken with differing degrees of success. When a younger Naruto attempted to throw 2 kunai at once, he threw them too wide and let go too late, causing one to score his father's calf and the other to come within a centimeter or so of his private area. Dante decided to start his gun training early, which had proven to be one of the best decisions he had ever made. Naruto was naturally skilled with firearms, and starting earlier than expected had only helped his talent grow. He would just have to rely on his luck because he didn't have the pistols his father had made specifically for him, dawn and dusk. Naruto. You're up, Iruka called. He looked at Hinata, who had already left, missing only 3 targets out of 10, and she gave him a shy, encouraging smile while blushing. Iruka handed him the 10 projectiles without saying a word, and walked a few feet behind Naruto, who sighed and went up to the line a few yards in front of 5 wooden posts with bulls' eyes painted on them, each with nicks, scratches, and indentions. After taking a deep breath to gather himself, Naruto threw the shuriken after the 5 kunai. Overall, Naruto consoled himself, it wasn't my worst performance. At least 2 of the kunai found the post they were aimed at, and one of the shurikens scratched its intended post. Sincerely, Iruka had expected better of the new kid after that amazing taijutsu bout. The teacher sighed. Well, at least he's got the taijutsu going for him. Hopefully no one will ever ask him to toss them a pencil, or something. Iruka perspired at the boy's pitiful skill, while many of the kids behind him laughed, and some wailed in disappointment. Iruka remarked, "Thank you, Naruto, next." "Well," he said to Hinata as he walked up to her, "that went about as well as expected." Naruto sighed and strode over to stand beside her. "I've never been any good at throwing weapons," he said, trembling, as Hinata gazed up at him questioningly. A woman's voice said, "Excuse me," from his right. The blonde-haired girl from earlier, the one who had been yelling at the pink-haired girl over that Sasuke kid, was there when he turned to look at her. What a shame. At least this should be interesting, Naruto thought. After Naruto said, "You're excused," the girl simply stared at him, likely filing him under the folder labeled, "Dropped on head as child." "Thanks," she replied, her mouth quirking up at the edge. Had she just gotten it? Oh, this was going to be interesting, Naruto thought, fighting the urge to give a facepalm. "Would you mind answering a question for me, Naruto?" she asked a little nervously, probably because she almost forgot his name, which was okay with him because he couldn't have remembered hers if it had come to that. He shrugged and said, "Sure, I guess. Would you mind telling me your name first?" "Oh," she said sheepishly, blinking. "I apologize. My name is Yamanaka Ino. It's a pleasure to meet you," she said, extending her somewhat fragile hand to him. His opinion of her increased as he took her hand and discovered that his prediction had been incorrect. In fact, she had a fairly firm grip. He declared, "I'm Naruto, just Naruto," and after they parted ways, he said, "Now, I think you had a question?" She asked with a tentative little smile, "Well, your eyes. Are they a keki genkai or something?" "A what?" Naruto blinked. He inquired. This time, Ino blinked. "You're not sure? Oh, I see. I apologize. You mentioned earlier that you were from the West, right?" She tapped her palm against her forehead and said that. "Yes, I am relatively new here, but doesn't that term have something to do with families?" "I believe I've heard it before," he answered. Ino glanced around and saw Hinata standing close to them. "Yeah, they're like, well, take Hinata here, for example," Ino said. Then she hurriedly added, "If, you don't mind, Hinata." With a slight flush, Hinata shook her head and said, No, don't mind." "Thanks, alright." So, Ino found it difficult to answer. It was her first time giving a serious lecture. "You've noticed that Hinata's eyes are different most of ours, right? That's because of a special trait that only her particular family has. No one else can use, and especially not possess it, because it's carried within a gene found only in her family's blood. That's why it's called a keki genkai, or bloodline limit," she continued. "Oh, so you're asking if these eyes are something only I possess," Naruto thought. Ino nodded and continued, "And if it wouldn't be prying, what it can do for you, like, what special abilities does it give you?" Like mine," Hinata added, startling Naruto and Ino, "allows M.Me to CT 300 S 60 degrees around me." Naruto blinked. He then thought about how to respond because he didn't think they would accept the fact that he was actually half demon. "Yeah, then, I guess this is my keki genkai." Well, I actually don't know if it's the eyes themselves," he said, gasping for an excuse. At that, Ino arched an eyebrow. She said, "Well, then, what is it?" Then it occurred to Naruto. "It's because I have a secondary chakra system," he informed the youths. His demonic chakra was entirely distinct from its human counterpart, so he assumed it was true enough. Dante had ensured that he could walk on trees, walls, water, etc., using his more stable human chakra, but he only ever really used his demonic chakra. Ino's eyes grew very wide. Seriously? She almost angrily exclaimed. The shinobi world had never heard of a secondary chakra system. Were all people from the West this cool? Naruto was the next to raise an eyebrow. His words were, "Yes, seriously. Watch," to her. A whirl of red chakra encircled him for less than a second, disappearing nearly as fast as it had appeared, and he hardly gave it any thought. See? Ino and Hinata stared at him in wonder. That chakra had felt a lot more powerful than normal chakra, in addition to being a completely different color. Pretty neat, huh? It's a lot more powerful than my regular chakra, but it's just as unstable. I can't really use it for anything even remotely considered delicate. Naruto smiled sheepishly at both of their expressions and said, "It's a lot more powerful than my regular chakra, but it's just as unstable." The entire class, whether they were in line or waiting for the others to finish, was staring at him. He imitated his first wave as he entered the academy, saying, "Hi." Before Iruka finally called them back to order so they could complete target practice, they continued to stare at him. Ino exclaimed, "Wow," still in disbelief. Then she remembered that she had interrupted Naruto and Hinata's conversation because she was curious. She started to leave, determined to get away before she could do anything more embarrassing, saying, "Sorry for bothering you too. I was just curious, so, bye." Naruto halted the blonde girl. "Hang on, Ino," he exclaimed. She looked over at him. He exclaimed with enthusiasm, "Why don't you hang out with us? The more the merrier. Right, Hinata?" he asked, turning to face her. The girl's eyes slightly widened. Right, she stumbled after saying it. Talking to Naruto was already difficult for her. How would she manage to do so with a girl who was at least 10 times more attractive than she was? Besides, fangirls like Ino didn't really appeal to her. However, Hinata reminded herself that she had previously been kind enough. Maybe I'm moving too quickly. She was being too critical, Hinata decided. Instead of using her stuttering words to support Naruto's statements, she smiled at Ino. Hinata saw Ino smile at them with one of the brightest smiles she had ever worn. What was the purpose of that? With a bit too much enthusiasm, Ino asked them, "You don't mind?" She had never really received an invitation to hang out with someone, so she didn't care. She mainly spoke to people at the academy, and even then, she kind of imposed herself on them. She didn't have any true friends. In fact, though, Hinata and Naruto had invited her to join them. "This is fantastic," she pondered. Naruto reassured her, "Not at all," with a fox-like smile on his face. It went really well with his eyes, Ino noticed. "Cool," she said, trying not to sound overly happy as she smiled back at him. Many people observed a minor shift in the seating arrangement once they were back in the classroom. Ino was now seated next to Naruto and Hinata, with the latter on his left, Hinata on his right, and Naruto in the middle seat. At the moment, Naruto was talking to the two girls about rocks, or something. "How would you make music with rocks? That doesn't make any sense," Ino said, squinting her eyes in confusion. No, uttered Naruto in frustration, "they don't use rocks." But, then why circa call it, rock, music? Similarly perplexed as Ino, Hinata inquired. Naruto hesitated. He acknowledged, "To be honest, I'm not sure myself. You know what, you're both going to come over to my house later. I have some CDs that you both have to listen to." Ino smiled. She remarked, "That sounds like fun." She asked, "You in?" as she turned to face Hinata. Hinata smiled slightly and nodded her head. Iruka essentially cut off their conversation when she said, "All right, class. Let's start the lecture today." He went on to talk about how the Leaf Village and the other great shinobi villages, Stone, Cloud, Mist, and Sand, were established. The remainder of the day felt like it went on forever. "Be sure to practice your ninjutsu. We'll be reviewing those tomorrow," Iruka said as the bell rang, signaling the end of the lecture and questions. "What's a ninjutsu?" Naruto asked after glancing up at his two friends and giving the teacher a blank stare. Along with the other students, Naruto, Hinata, and Ino left the academy building. "Don't worry about it, Naruto," Ino said to the boy with red eyes. "I'm sure Iruka won't expect you to know those techniques. And besides, you've got the rest of the year to learn them. With me and Hinata helping you, I'll bet you'll master them within the week." Naruto felt a great sense of relief as he saw Ino's excited face and then Hinata's sweet smile. He sighed and said, "Phew, I'm glad I met you too. I wouldn't have had a clue about what I was supposed to do. Thanks." He gave them both that same foxy grin, which made Ino and Hinata blush, which was unexpected. He had spotted someone he needed to talk to, though, so he didn't notice the change in their face color. Naruto said, "Pardon me, ladies. I'll be right back." Raiden and Hananoki were strolling side by side in friendly silence while he read from a small orange book, apparently oblivious to his surroundings. "Hey!" a voice behind them yelled. When they turned, Raiden and Hananoki saw that the new child had called out to them. With a fox-like smile, the boy introduced himself and said, "Hello, I'm Naruto. I apologize if I interrupted, but I wanted to ask you," pointing to Raiden, "a question." The boy with the amethyst eyes arched an eyebrow. He then closed the book, marked his page, and remarked, "Sure, name's Raiden, by the way." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Naruto," his companion added, "and I'm Hananoki." "It's nice to meet you too. I know this is kind of sudden, but, well, Raiden, I want to fight you," Naruto said, still grinning, but now a little sheepishly. Although Hananoki appeared somewhat surprised, Raiden's eyes gleamed behind his slack exterior. "Only if you don't mind doing it in half an hour," he replied. He continued, saying, "I'll need to grab a couple of things first." He turned and started to leave, waving back at Naruto. "Meet me back here in 30 minutes. Then we'll head somewhere better suited to a little spar." Hananoki glanced uncertainly between Raiden and Naruto for a moment, appeared ready to speak, and then hurried to catch up to Raiden. Naruto smiled. He would have plenty of time to return to the house and get his own equipment in 30 minutes. From behind him, Ino questioned, "Did you seriously just run up to that guy and challenge him to a fight?" Naruto looked at the face of the girls, who were looking shocked. He put his hands behind his head and said, "Not really. I just told him that I wanted to fight him. He actually suggested that we do it today, so I was right about him. Come on, let's go back to my house so that I can get my gear." He started to jog in the direction of his home. On either side of the boy, Hinata and Ino ran to fall in step. As they jogged, Ino questioned, "What do you mean, I was right about him?" With a mischievous smile, Naruto added, "That he's a fighter, like me. And that means this is going to be awesome." 2 stools were set up in front of the Ichiraku ramen stand, and Dante and Kakashi sat on them. As they waited for their orders, Dante inquired, "So, what's this about your brother?" Then Kakashi tapped his chin and said, Where to begin?" Dante started to perspire. "Well, how about the beginning?" Kakashi grinned. "Oh, why not?" was his reply. "Alright, so, it hadn't been very long since Minato had died, and you took Naruto, maybe, a week, or so. Anyway." Rewind. Kakashi wandered in a daze through the deserted streets of Konoha at night. He was still in shock over losing his last teammate and his sensei. Both had perished in the conflict with the Kyuubi. Rin had been crushed by one of the beast's heels while attempting to tend to one of the injured, and Minato had perished merging the Kyuubi with his own son. Did he have anything left to live for now that everyone he cared about was gone? A few feet in front of him, lightning suddenly struck the ground, causing thunder to roar. A tiny crater had been formed. After removing his arm from in front of his eye, Kakashi heard sobbing coming from somewhere after the ringing in his ears stopped. The crater. A small baby was lying in the crater, and he could see that it was crying as he stalked forward. Despite using all of his senses, Kakashi was unable to locate anyone else nearby who could move fast enough to place that unfortunate child there. Lifting the child into his arms, he leaned over. Strange purple eyes that vaguely resembled amethysts gazed up at the one that had picked it up, but the baby still cried. Kakashi took another look around before deciding to go to the orphanage. However, the orphanage was on the opposite side of the village from his house, which was about 100 feet away. Trying to understand how the child had suddenly appeared, he decided that there was no harm in taking he looked down at the baby boy home with him for the night. End of flashback. Continued Kakashi. "The next day I took him to the orphanage, but they said they were just too full as it was, after the Kyuubi attack. So, I went to the Hokage." Rewind. "I can understand your concern, Kakashi," said Sandaime. "But, there's really nothing I can do." "But, Hokage-sama, he's just a baby," the youthful Kakashi countered. "I realize this, but my influence can extend only so far. If you want to find a home for the boy, you'll have to ask around yourself. Until then, I'm taking you off active duty," the Hokage sternly replied. Kakashi's gaze grew wide. Wait, but, the young man was silenced when Sarutobi held up a hand. "We do not know how long it will take you to find this child a home, and until you do, you'll have to take care of him. And caring for such a small child is no small task. I'll provide a weekly stipend if it becomes necessary," said the elderly gentleman. After standing and stuttering in search of a disagreement, Kakashi eventually bowed his head and said, "Yes, Hokage-sama." End of flashback. Kakashi went on. So, I asked around when I could, but, as the days, and then weeks, passed, he just, I dunno, grew on me. That gave Dante a smile. He was aware of the emotion. Kakashi mumbled, well, speak of the devil. Dante joined him in his curiosity as he stood up and looked down the road. Raiden smiled when he noticed Kakashi leaning out of the ramen stand. Hey bro, he said. Then he noticed the man with the white hair, who was also looking at him. The two of them left the stand entirely, and Kakashi exclaimed, hello Raiden, Hananoki. Hi Kakashi-san, exclaimed the youth. Hooking his thumb at his companion, he said, I'd like you both to meet an old friend of mine. This is Dante. Dante, this is my brother, Raiden, and his friend, Hananoki. Dante said, hey there, and held up a hand to greet. Raiden said, nice to meet you, and resumed his stroll, but I really need to get home. Kakashi's eyebrow went up. What's the rush? A new kid named Naruto said he wanted to fight. Raiden wants to grab his stuff first, Hananoki replied as she started to follow Raiden. After exchanging glances, Dante and Kakashi decided in silence to see whose training was superior as their next task. Dante followed Kakashi through Konoha's woods to the location of the children's impromptu fight. So, how do you know where they're gonna throw down? Asked Dante. Well, if your Naruto was the one who challenged Raiden, it's only natural that Raiden gets to decide the battlefield, Kakashi replied. He continued, that, and the fact that Raiden knows Konoha better than Naruto does. Dante nodded and then responded, alright, here's another question. You said you found the kid in a crater that had been left by a bolt of lightning, right? Yeah, said the one-eyed Genin in a terse reply. Dante started to perspire. Did that fail to strike you as, I dunno, weird? Abnormal? Not quite natural? Perhaps even a little odd? This time, Kakashi turned to look back. Of course it did. At first I scoured the town for his real parents, when I wasn't busy taking care of him myself. When I couldn't find them, I looked through the entire library, going through as many history books and old records as I could to see if something even vaguely related had ever happened. And in case you're wondering, no it hasn't. Not that we're aware of anyway. So I kept looking. He nodded. I look in every town I visit on missions, and I have yet to find any explanation. Dante inquired, does Raiden know how you found him? No, I told him that he was orphan, and that I found him abandoned on the streets. I haven't told him the circumstances. They don't really hold much weight, seeing as how they don't even have a good explanation, Kakashi replied. After giving that some thought, Dante concluded that Kakashi was most likely correct. There's not much use in attempting to explain something you don't understand. Here we are, said Kakashi. Dante glanced around the wooded clearing. The three wooden posts that stood in the center appeared to be the only thing that set it apart. Kakashi pivoted and glanced at his friend. This is training ground 7. Raiden and I come out here for sparring, he stated. Why don't we stay out of view? Wouldn't want to pressure the boys with our presence, he said, glancing at the trees surrounding them. He jumped into the trees to wait with Dante. A few minutes later, the fighters took to the field. Dante saw that Raiden had added a few items to his outfit. A generic ninja utility belt with pouches that undoubtedly held a lot of shuriken, kunai, and other items. But Dante was most intrigued by the weapons he carried at his sides. The child had somehow obtained a pair of Huidi Shuangdao, or butterfly swords. He didn't believe that the elemental nations were particularly interested in international trade, and the swords were indigenous to areas south of them. Later, he would have to ask Kakashi. It's clear that this kid is into weapons too, wherever he got them, Dante said. Naruto is probably trembling with anticipation. Naruto was actually trembling with excitement. Too eager were his hands to pull Force Edge out of its makeshift sheath and begin the fight. As soon as he got home, he put on his light black jacket and the belt that held dawn and dusk, and he practically ran back to the academy, where Hananoki and Raiden were already waiting. Just as he stepped into the clearing, Naruto came to a halt, followed closely by his friends Ino and Hinata. As he and Hananoki positioned themselves at the far side of the clearing, Raiden was considerably calmer, his face fixed on that effortless smile of his. But on the inside, he shared Naruto's euphoria. You ready, Raiden? Naruto said, cracking his knuckles and then his neck. Over one amethyst eye, Raiden arched an eyebrow. Only if you're done warming up, Naruto, he answered back. He reached for his blades with his hands. With a shout of, Stinger! Force Edge stood by his side, his right hand poised, and Naruto leapt forward. His blade was encircled by similarly colored energy, and his crimson eyes glowed. When Naruto suddenly accelerated, Raiden's eyes widened, and he leapt to his right, narrowly avoiding Naruto's thrust but not the release of the blade's stored energy. Naruto was protected from the effects as Force Edge flashed a vivid red and power erupted from the sword in all directions except backwards. Raiden was flung far into the air after getting caught in the middle of his dodge. Naruto paused to appreciate his work, but Raiden straightened himself in midair, bringing his hands together and beginning to tangle his fingers in strange patterns. With a raised eyebrow, Naruto pondered the actions of his opponent. Lightning release. Bolt. The amethyst. Eyed Ninja yelled as he thrust his left hand at Naruto, and then his hands abruptly stopped. Suddenly, a lightning bolt struck the crimson-eyed fighter in the dead center of his chest. He skidded a considerable distance across the ground before flipping himself back to his feet, letting out a cry of shock and agony as he did so. Placing his hand to his chest, he glanced up at his opponent, who had landed by now and was staring at Naruto with the same grin he had had since they first met, but this time there was a gleam of humor in his eyes. Raiden chastised, "You shouldn't be so hasty, my friend." After saying that, he drew his own weapons, holding them both upside down in his hands. "After all," he continued, "those rumors are completely untrue. Lightning can strike the same place twice." As soon as his instincts took over, Naruto started measuring the blades in his opponent's hands. The hilts were most likely 5 inches long with a cross guard to protect the wielder's fingers, and the blades appeared to be about 12 inches long and possibly 4 inches wide. Naruto blinked. "You're gonna fight with a couple of elongated butcher knives?" Even though Raiden scowled, there was still a gleam of humor in his eyes when he said, "Their names are Hirameki." Flash. He whirled the blade in his right hand, and Shugeki. Crash. He whirled the one in his left. "What's that guy's name, by the way?" he asked, tilting his head. Once more, Naruto blinked. "Force Edge," he answered, although he had never considered his sword to be a guy. Raiden gave a single nod and his effortless smile reappeared. "Not a bad name for a sword like that," he stated. He then threw himself forward. As the two fighters started their next battle, Ino and Hinata both kept their eyes wide. Raiden retaliated with a straightforward high block with Shugeki after Naruto swept his sword down at his head. Hirameki then stabbed at his opponent's bare stomach. Using the metal plate on his glove, Naruto swatted the thrust away. Then, he spun himself and dragged his blade away from Raiden's, using the momentum to sweep his blade forcefully across Raiden's chest. However, Naruto immediately leapt into position as Raiden ducked and swung his swords together in a scissor slash at his calves. Raiden took advantage of the moment to turn his swords so that they were facing the right way in his hands, and then he slashed Naruto's raised legs with his scissors once more. However, Raiden was forced to change his strike into an X block after Naruto used a powerful arc to bring Force Edge down. However, Naruto's block crumpled under the force of his swing, which was stronger than he had anticipated. Naruto took advantage of the moment to stun his opponent and gave Raiden's chin a vicious uppercut. This time, Raiden grunted in pain as he shot into the air. He landed hard on his back instead of righting himself in the air like he used to do. After giving himself a neck crack, Naruto smiled and remarked, "That was for the lightning bolt." Raiden replied, "Fair enough," kicking up his legs and crouching down. Despite a large red patch on his chin, he was smiling again. "Wow," Ino muttered in amazement. Even without Naruto's uppercut, or more specifically, the sword technique he had employed at the start, she was positive that Sasuke would have been defeated by that lightning jutsu. Was the previous Uchiha truly that much inferior? Above all, she asked herself, did she really care? Force Edge boldly slashed and stabbed with all the strength and delicacy of an angry lion, attempting to split its wielder's opponent in two before she could think any longer. The two charged each other again, their blades dancing with their own unique styles. As opposed to this, Shugeki and Hirameki woven a web of defense around one another, looking for chances to dart in and attack their opponent, much like two wolves might cooperate to eliminate particularly large or dangerous prey. Ino was taken aback to discover that Raiden's quick blows consistently failed to land. Naruto appeared ready to defend any gap that arose from his bold moves. The blade was about to stab Naruto's side, but Force Edge's hilt knocked it away, allowing Naruto to respond with a thrust of his own. It appeared just in time to block one of Raiden's cuts. Back and forth it continued, with neither side gaining the upper hand nor retreating. "Amazing," said Hananoki, who was standing next to her. Both Hinata and Ino leapt, with Hinata even squeaking in surprise. When did she cross the field to their side? Hananoki didn't express any signs that she was startled. "How is your friend doing that?" she asked, turning to face the other two girls. Ino asked, "What do you mean?" In return, the young man with mahogany hair claimed, "He's blocking everything Raiden throws at him, and still finding enough room to launch his own attacks. I've never seen anyone do that." Even Kakashi has to use 2 weapons against him. Ino said, "Well, don't ask me," to Hananoki. "Any ideas?" Ino asked, turning to Hinata. Hinata was a little taken aback by the question. She had never really been asked what she thought about anything outside of the academy. I'm not sure either, was her glum response. Even after attempting to activate her Byakugan earlier, she was still confused by Naruto's movements. Hananoki frowned and folded her arms. With a seemingly thorough thought process, she started, "Well, I guess we'll have to avoid fighting him, if it comes down to it." Hinata and Ino both gave their best face plants. It was the most fun Naruto had had in years. On his second day in Konoha, he met someone who wielded his blades like an expert. Back west, he had never met anyone who was even competent at swordplay, aside from Dante and a few demons he had encountered in the Temen.ni. Guru. He hoped that this was how life would always be. Raiden then came at him with another scissor slash after flipping the sword in his left hand right side up. This time, however, he performed the move vertically, aiming his right hand at his groin and his left hand down on his head. Clever, but not clever enough, Naruto thought. Shocked, cried Naruto, who gathered his demonic chakra and clenched his left hand into a fist. A huge, crimson shockwave was created when his fist slammed the ground beneath his own feet and power erupted from the earth. Raiden had sensed the energy building, but as he always seemed to do, he miscalculated the actual power behind each of Naruto's techniques. He was flung across the field into a poor tree after the blast struck him. There was a gasp in the background, but Naruto ignored it. Already, his opponent was getting his bearings. Raiden paused, trying to think of something new to do. With that strong, red chakra of his, Naruto was able to perfectly complement his superb swordsmanship. Raiden thought maybe removing that sword from him should be the first step. As he considered the ideal method for the task, he forced himself not to snicker. As Raiden sheathed his weapons, Naruto looked on in bewilderment. Was he already going to forfeit? They had only just begun. But those thoughts were soon dashed, and his bewilderment gave way to caution as his opponent started tying his fingers in a wide variety of knots once more. Raiden rushed Naruto, his fingers blurring in a flurry of motion, just as Naruto was about to launch another lightning bolt. In response, Naruto adopted his standard tactic for dealing with charging enemies. He defended himself by standing his ground and getting ready to fight back. The red-eyed blonde's response was precisely what Raiden had anticipated. When faced with a challenge, Naruto certainly didn't appear to back down. In an attempt to alter Raiden's trajectory, Naruto swung his blade down at his opponent's head when he was just a few feet away. Lightning release. Magnetic field. Raiden shouted instead, flipping his palms up at Force Edge. Force Edge was ripped from Naruto's grasp and flew somewhere behind him after his strike was stopped in mid-strike. A lengthy sequence of strong, lightning, fast punches hit Naruto's gut before he could react beyond thinking, fuck. Raiden leapt and spun in place as the flurry came to an end. Naruto was ready to defend himself because he was certain he was going to be kicked in the face, but Raiden allowed himself to fall to the ground and finish another rotation instead. This time, however, the amethyst-eyed boy arose with his momentum and struck Naruto's now unprotected face with his fist instead of the sweep kick Naruto had anticipated. It was Naruto's turn to fly in the direction of an innocent tree and collide with it. On this occasion, Raiden couldn't help but grin. That was for the shockwave, he uttered, using the same tone as Naruto. In response, Naruto stood up and grinned back, saying, "Fair enough." Then, as Raiden moved on to the next stage of his strategy, ranged combat, his hands shifted to the pouches on his belt. When he saw a flash of steel emerge from the pouches on his opponent's belt, Naruto smiled eagerly, quickly realizing what Raiden was doing. Raiden threw 10 shuriken at him, and his fingers twitched. Then his hands moved, pulling Dawn and Dusk out of their holsters at a speed far quicker than Raiden's. Sized spheres of chakra leapt from Naruto's devices and deflected all 10 of Raiden's shuriken, causing him to raise an eyebrow. Given his performance at the academy, he was pretty sure Naruto had terrible aim. However, those were throwing weapons, he reminded himself. He looked at the gadgets that Naruto was holding. I have a feeling that throwing those is not appropriate. Naruto smiled at Raiden's perplexed expression. I've never been any good at throwing stuff, he explained, so Dad decided to try teaching me how to use guns, he said, spinning the devices in his hands, earlier than he'd intended. He pointed the pistols at Raiden, crossed his arms, and squeezed the triggers, stating, I found it much easier. Raiden was already moving, having figured out that it was not a good idea to stand right in front of the guns. For the next minute, the amethyst-eyed fighter darted around the field, using skillfully aimed shuriken to dodge and deflect the chakra bullets. He reassessed his opponent as he went along. Naruto was not just a skilled swordsman, he also had exceptional marksmanship. Naruto fired both weapons in perfect time. In an attempt to contain the amethyst-eyed boy, he would aim one of them straight at Raiden and use the other to direct the boy into a stream of fire. It was not long before Raiden realized that if he restricted himself to using shuriken, he would be severely outmatched. He estimated that he would run out of projectiles long before Naruto ran out of ammunition because Naruto's weapons were powered by chakra. He therefore chose option number 2, which was ninjutsu, which Naruto appeared to be lacking. In the middle of the sprint, he changed direction and went directly toward Naruto. He pushed out his left hand and yelled, "Lightning release." Bolt, after flipping through the 5 required hand signs while navigating through the barrage of bullets. Naruto had anticipated another such attack after spotting the telltale finger. Twisting, he tried to flank his adversary by jumping to the right of the lightning bolt. But Raiden, too, had been ready for that move. He had already finished the hand signs for his next move. With his palms out once more, he twisted in Naruto's direction and screamed, "Lightning release, nerve pulse." Naruto was engulfed in a wave of electricity, but instead of experiencing any actual pain, all of his muscles locked up and contracted on their own. He made an unsuccessful attempt to regain control over his muscles. With a sudden burst of speed that Naruto hadn't seen from him throughout the entire match, Raiden jumped at the chance and charged at him. Which implied that he had been holding back, and he probably still was, given that this was merely a friendly spar. At that moment, Naruto understood that he didn't need to feel guilty for simply doing that. Naruto exceeded Raiden's expectations with his performance. As Raiden discovered the red-eyed blonde, the Westerner regained control of his body and punched him desperately, much more quickly than Raiden had expected. If Raiden took any pride in his combat skills, it was his quickness. Bringing his heel down at Naruto's head, Raiden threw himself into a flip. Unnoticed, however, Naruto seized the offending foot and proceeded to force Raiden's face into the ground. However, Naruto's throw was cut short by Raiden's outstretched hands. He then twisted, letting go of Naruto's foot, and used the other leg to strike out. In response, Naruto made a high block, which Raiden used to return to a crouch and start making more hand signals. Naruto kicked his opponent's exposed face, determined to stop him. Back. Flipping quickly, Raiden continued to twist his fingers through the hand signs. He cupped his hands upon landing and yelled, "Lightning release. Arc lightning," while pointing them at Naruto. With the intention of swallowing Naruto, a stream of lightning poured from Raiden's fingertips. However, the red-eyed boy had anticipated this kind of attack and had made the necessary preparations. "Block!" he shouted, his arms folded, the backs of his hands facing the approaching storm, his demonic chakra shaped and molded as tightly as he could hold it. A solid sphere of red energy collided with the untamed stream of lightning, and the crimson orb of defense that Naruto had built around himself held firm no matter how hard the flow of electricity tried to eat it up. When Raiden's technique came into contact with the red energy, he noticed an odd sensation. His chakra started to deplete a little more quickly than it should have. Even though his jutsu consumed a significant amount of chakra, he could see that Naruto's defense was more complex than simply thwarting attacks. He increased the stakes, putting more force behind his lightning strike out of curiosity. Once more, he experienced the sensation that a small portion of his chakra was being extracted from him. As he felt the effects of using so much chakra in such a short period of time, he halted his jutsu and inhaled deeply. He tried to determine what else that defense was for as he looked at Naruto, who appeared unharmed by employing such a powerful defensive tactic. Meanwhile, when Raiden tried to figure out the one defensive tactic Dante had taught him, Naruto smiled and cracked his neck. Generous, he chose to hint at his opponent. He raised his hands and pulled at his gloves, giving the impression that he was merely moving them into a more advantageous position. When Raiden saw the gloves, especially the metal plates attached to them, his eyes widened. He extended his senses and discovered exactly what he had anticipated. A significant amount of chakra was now present in the plates. Furthermore, he was certain that they had never been supercharged in such a way. He shifted into a defensive stance to consider his next move, suddenly extremely concerned about what Naruto could do with those. However, before Raiden could complete his stance, Naruto was on top of him, screaming, "Release!" as his left fist delivered an uppercut to Raiden's stomach. When Naruto's fist struck Raiden, it was the hardest blow he had ever received. With the help of a tremendous amount of chakra, the impact propelled Raiden skyward. Naruto, however, was far from done. He ended up only a few inches above his target after following Raiden into the air. With another exclamation of Release. Naruto raised his right hand and brought it down to strike his opponent's back with a palm strike. With a loud crash, Raiden's lifeless body struck the ground, creating a massive dust cloud. Hananoki even yelled, "Raiden," as the three girls on the sidelines gasped together. As the dust settled, Naruto touched down. Raiden was in a good-sized crater, face down. He didn't move at all. "Did I go overboard?" Naruto pondered. He rushed to Raiden's side, worried that he had gotten too involved in the altercation and let himself go a bit too much. He dropped to his knees and rolled his opponent's lifeless body over. Raiden's eyes opened as he did, and he seized Naruto in a tight embrace. Naruto was overcome with excruciating muscle convulsing pain as Raiden's entire body exploded in a burst of lightning before he could comprehend the oddity of the amethyst-eyed ninja's actions. The red-eyed warrior fell to the ground. Then he sensed that familiar, powerful arms were drawing him up. Finally, he was able to raise his head and saw his father's smiling face. His voice was a little slurred as he said, "Dad?" The lightning had numbed him all over, in one way or another. "Quite a show you put on there, kid," Dante said, complimenting him. The blonde then turned his head to follow Dante's gaze after he had passed Naruto. Behind him, Naruto saw Kakashi holding an arm over his stomach while he helped a visibly hurt Raiden limp out of the woods. When Raiden saw how difficult it was for Naruto to stand by himself, he gave a simple smile and said, "Lightning clone." With a smile of his own, Naruto replied to his new friend, "Cool." The group decided it was time to eat after much discussion, and after the girls reprimanded the boys for pushing their little Spar too far, in order to give the children more alone time, Kakashi and Dante took them to the Ichiraku ramen stand and then left them alone while they walked around Konoha. Dante made the decision to ask, "What did y'all think?" to begin the inevitable conversation. In response, Kakashi said, "I think he fights a lot like you do." After giving it some thought, he continued, "And he looks a lot like him." Dante nodded. Naruto's appearance was undoubtedly influenced by the fourth. He said to Kakashi, "About his heritage, I told him everything." "Do you regret it?" Kakashi asked, glancing at him. "Absolutely not," said the man with the white hair. Genin, who only had one eye, nodded. "Then I trust your judgment. He can obviously take care of himself," he replied. Although, his technique could certainly use a bit of refinement. A little finesse wouldn't hurt. Dante gave his friend a doubtful glance and countered, "You're kidding, right? The kid's got power. Finesse might work for you and your bro, but Naruto doesn't need it. You saw how well he did against Raiden in his duel-wielding technique. And he could only get better by adding some refinement to all that power," Kakashi replied. Then he turned to face Dante, looking very serious, and said, "I've registered to become a sensei. I understand that Naruto will be graduating with this class. I'd like to request that Naruto be on my squad." Kakashi's wish to enroll his son as a student did not surprise Dante. He had actually anticipated it. The idea was viewed with only one reservation. With the same solemnity as the one-eyed Genin, he whispered, "Does this have anything to do with Minato?" As he responded, Kakashi maintained eye contact and said, "A little. But I truly think Naruto could benefit under my tutelage. I won't bring it up with the Hokage if you don't like the idea, but I swear that my personal feelings won't come into the equation." An uncontrollable smile spread across Dante's face. He had anticipated that response. He winked at his one-eyed friend and said, "Well, I suppose if he's going to be learning ninja techniques, he might as well learn from the best." Dante couldn't tell how he did it, but Kakashi was able to use just one eye to smile back at him through the mask. "Thanks," said Kakashi. After knowing Raiden for so long, Hananoki should have been accustomed to it, but she couldn't help but be a little taken aback because Raiden always ate a lot after a particularly demanding workout. Finally, at 18 bowls, he had stopped. The fact that Naruto was now finishing his 25th bowl of ramen, however, truly caught her off guard. There were only 2 seats available for other patrons at the ramen stand because the group of 5 occupied the majority of the seats. Raiden, Naruto, Ino, and Hinata were seated to her right, while Hananoki occupied the seat on the left. As she had anticipated, Hananoki glanced past Naruto to his female companions, who were both gawking at him with a kind of macabre fascination. Ino muttered, "That can't possibly be good for you," as though she didn't want to ruin Naruto's feast. Hinata simply gave the blonde a nod of agreement. After giving up on the surprise eating competition he and Naruto had started when they first arrived, Raiden simply shook his head. He became alert when he heard a laugh he recognized coming from beyond the curtains of the stand. "Excuse me," he said hastily and passed out of the restaurant. His suspicion was confirmed when he saw a girl wearing a black pair of pants that ended just above her ankles, blue shinobi sandals, a Konoha ninja's headband tied around her forehead, and a pink sleeveless shirt with short yellow straps adorning the front at regular intervals. Her hazelnut-colored eyes glowed when she saw him leaving the ramen stand, and her earthen brown hair was tied up in double buns as usual. Raiden had never seen her with her hair down. Tenten cried out, "Raiden!" and ran to her best friend. When she saw the scuffs and scratches on his clothes, which coincidentally included his weapons, and the bruise on his chin, she abruptly stopped. She was primarily drawn to his eyes, though, as they shone a little brighter than normal. There is only one possible meaning for that. "Have fun?" she asked with a slight smirk and a raised eyebrow. "You have no idea," Raiden said, his eyes glimmering a little brighter at the idea. "That reminds me." He snapped his fingers, reached through the curtains he had just exited, and appeared to grab something before pulling. Tenten was suddenly looking at a boy who was the same height and build as Raiden, but he had crimson eyes with slightly slit pupils, bright blonde hair, three jagged lines on each cheek that looked like whiskers, and a mouth full of ramen noodles. "Tenten," Raiden said casually, as though he hadn't just ripped someone from their meal. "This is Naruto. He's new here." "Naruto, this is my old friend Tenten." After swiftly finishing the noodles, Naruto, like Raiden, reached into the stand and took out a napkin. After cleaning his hands and mouth, he returned the napkin to its original location. Then, with an odd fox-like smile, he held out his hand to the hazelnut-eyed girl and said, "Nice to meet you, Tenten." After shaking his hand and grinning at the stranger's actions, she said, "It's nice to meet you too, Naruto." Naruto asked, "Can I go back to eating now?" as he glanced between Raiden and Tenten. He shouted, "Hey," in protest as Raiden immediately pushed him back into the ramen stand. Tenten had noticed Naruto's scratches and scrapes, as well as the sword he had been carrying on his back. "He's the guy, huh?" she said, turning to face Raiden. "Fairly good, I take it." With that effortless smile she had become so accustomed to, Raiden simply said, "Nope, he's even better." Tenten whistled softly and her eyes widened. "Damn," she secretly said. "How'd they do?" she inquired, glancing at the blades sheathed on her friend's hips. After removing the amethyst-eyed boy's armor and spinning Shugeki and Hirameki around a few times, he said, "They were the best weapons I've ever had the privilege to wield." He gave Tenten a genuine smile that made his eyes shine, and he continued, "I can never thank you enough." Raiden was giving her the same look he had when she had given them to him, and Tenten did her best not to flush. She was always pleased when her efforts were recognized, but when Raiden expressed his approval, she felt even more proud. The fact that she had forged those blades herself, her first solo forging, especially for him, didn't help either, and she was almost ecstatic to hear that he enjoyed them so much. Putting her hands on her hips, she tried to hide her excitement by telling him, "You don't have to thank me, idiot. They were a birthday present. Just be sure not to break them or something." Raiden returned his easy smile and placed the weapons back in their sheaths. His words were, "I'll do my best." Then he asked, "So, how was your mission?" as if he remembered something. Tenten was momentarily perplexed before realizing that she had entirely forgotten that she had just returned from her first C-rank experience with her Genin squad. She scowled as the mission specifics came flooding back to her. Raiden frowned slightly as he saw the expression on the young girl's face and said, "What's the matter, Tenten?" A firm hand landed on her shoulder before she could even come up with a reason not to answer. Her sensei was grinning down at her when she glanced over her shoulder. "While I admire your youthful desire to visit with your friend after your first successful C-rank mission, Tenten, we really must be on our way to the Hokage," said Guy. Tenten must have heard her talking to Raiden because he saw understanding in her teacher's eyes. It must have occurred to him that she was not yet prepared to go into the specifics. "It is good to see that you remain as youthful as ever, Raiden. You look as if you have just come from a splendid battle," Guy said, turning to face Raiden. Raiden was always the astute one, and he saw that Guy was attempting to change the subject from whatever Tenten's predicament was. Raiden fixed his easy smile and turned it to Guy, deciding that if it was important enough, Guy would step in on Tenten's behalf. "Splendid is such a strong word, and it describes the battle perfectly. I'll have to regale you with the story later," Raiden responded. Guy was not a Jonin for no reason. He was aware that Raiden was only complying, albeit reluctantly. The squad commander couldn't really blame Kakashi's younger brother for anything. Indeed, he was very happy that the girl was so much loved by someone other than Tenten's father. Even though he was unaware of it, he was even more impressed that Raiden was prepared to give her the time she required to sort out her feelings. For some reason, Guy thought to himself, "I like the kid so much, You can tell me about it when we have that sparring match you asked for. Perhaps tomorrow after the academy lets out, he said with a smile to Raiden. That brought back a small portion of Raiden's real smile. Sparring with Guy was always fun. His words, "I'm looking forward to it," after giving Tenten a final look, which she did not return, he said, "Sorry to keep you guys. I'll let you be on your way." He then stepped back through the curtains to indicate that he was done talking. Tenten just stared at the floor, trying not to picture blood splattered at her feet, while Guy looked down at her. Raiden sat back down and Hananoki reprimanded him. "Oh, are you done talking to your girlfriend?" Naruto almost choked on the noodles he was eating at the time. He nearly shouted, "That was your girlfriend?" Yakuda said something, as he pointed accusingly at his new friend after he had swallowed them without killing himself. "Sooner or later, you're gonna give up on that crazy idea," the boy with the amethyst eyes said, letting out a sigh and shaking his head. Hananoki ordered, "It's not crazy, you like her, don't you? So date her already." She's sighing, she added, "If you just bother to look for it, you'd probably notice that she likes you just as much as you like her." Raiden's eyebrow cocking was more due to the tone of her voice than anything she actually said. When Raiden simply shook his head once more, Hananoki let out a frustrated sigh. While Hinata found herself wishing she could be more gregarious like Hananoki, Ino laughed at their sibling-like interactions. Naruto took a few moments to observe Raiden and his female companion. "So, she's not your girlfriend?" he asked. Raiden said, "Pick yourself up, Naruto, my friend. We're going to teach you everything there is to know about ninjutsu, well, the basics at the very least," and left the ramen stand after he had sufficiently pressed Naruto's face against the counter. After Ino and Hinata had removed Naruto's head from the counter, Hananoki trailed behind him, followed by the other three. Naruto and his new pals had an especially dull day at the academy the following day. The group of Wood.Be ninjas had spent the remainder of the previous afternoon instructing the Westerner, and Iruka ended up reviewing everything they had learned. Everything was a lengthy repetition of the gang's brief tutoring session, including hand signals and their particular applications, ninjutsu, genjutsu classifications, the elements and their advantages and disadvantages, etc. The 5 members of the group joyfully fled the academy after the agonizingly long day of lectures. Naruto noticed Sasuke leaving the school alone as they were doing so. He thought, "Where's the emo.kid going?" to his friends. Raiden scoffed as he glanced at Sasuke's back. "He goes back to his neighborhood to practice by himself and mope," he answered. Reflexively, Ino reprimanded, "Raiden, you shouldn't say things like that. Don't you know what happened to him?" Still staring at Sasuke's back, Raiden scowled. His eyes strayed back to the retreating Uchiha's back before he turned to Ino and said, "I know exactly what happened to him. I don't pretend to understand how much that hurts, but I refuse to believe that it's an excuse to pretend the world around you doesn't exist." He then went on to say, "Sasuke needs to wake up and accept that the world did, in fact, not end that night." Raiden's sudden seriousness caused Naruto to blink. In fact, it appeared that he was upset about it. With caution, the foreigner said, What are we talking about?" Raiden blinked, almost forgetting that Naruto couldn't have been aware of the Uchiha and his clan's fate. He turned to Naruto and explained, "About 6 years ago, now, Sasuke's older brother, Itachi Uchiha, one of Konoha's strongest ninja, slaughtered the entire Uchiha clan, except for Sasuke himself. In fact, Itachi killed their mother while Sasuke was watching." Naruto's eyes got really big, then he said, "Holy shit, so, knowing that, don't you think you're being just a little, I don't know, harsh?" "Nope," said Raiden with ease. Then he abruptly began to leave the group, saying, "I'll catch you guys later. I've got a training match with Guy planned." Hananoki sighed as the other 4 watched him leave. What's the matter?" Hinata asked, glancing at Hananoki. What bothers Raiden the most is that Sasuke's never even tried to get over what happened. He clings to the memory, unwilling to move on, thinking only of taking revenge on his brother. Raiden views this as, well, weak. Something he didn't consider Sasuke to be back then. Hananoki shook her head and chose to go into further detail about Raiden's actions when she looked off into the distance. "Wait," Ino started, "what do you mean, back then? How would you two know what goes on in Sasuke's head?" "The 3 of used to be friends," she said in a very serious tone, ignoring Ino's shocked reaction. "Prior to the notorious massacre, the 3 of us were inseparable. Raiden and Sasuke were rivals and best friends who were always pushing each other to improve and reach new heights of ability. I just cheered them on. I don't think I'll ever be as strong as they are. If Itachi hadn't done such a horrible thing, Sasuke would definitely be on par with Raiden by now. Sasuke cut himself off from everyone after the massacre. After finding out what had happened, Raiden and I were devastated and did everything we could to support him. All we wanted was for our friend to return. However, he simply ignored us despite our repeated attempts to contact him. Then, roughly a year after the incident, Raiden simply lost it. Rewind. Hi. Sasuke. As soon as Raiden saw Sasuke strolling through the streets, he rushed up to the young Uchiha, with Hananoki following closely behind. Raiden scowled but replaced it with his previous smile and said, "Hey man, Hana and I are going to get some lunch," but Sasuke didn't even bother to look at him. "Why don't you accompany us? For the sake of the past?" Sasuke simply gazed into Raiden's eyes, his own icy and heartless, before saying the first thing he had said to the boy with the amethyst eyes in a year. "Leave me alone." Hananoki's eyes widened, uncertain if she had heard Sasuke correctly, and Raiden's face went blank. Sasuke dropped to the ground, clutching his face in agony as Raiden's fist struck his face without any opposition. Raiden seemed even more infuriated by this sight. "Get up, Sasuke," he whispered lethal words, and when the Uchiha remained motionless, Raiden screamed, "I said, get up." In response to the lack of reaction, Raiden stepped over Sasuke, grabbed his collar, raised the black-eyed boy's head, and punched him repeatedly while shouting, "Get up! Wake up! Wake up!" After the people around them hurried in and managed to pry Raiden away from the final Uchiha, Raiden relaxed and looked at Sasuke with a mix of sadness and rage. His amethyst eyes began to well up with tears, and he finally whispered, "Why won't you get up?" End of flashback. Looking at the ground, Ino and Hinata reflected on how terrible it must be to watch your best friend endure such agony, and then to try to assist and be rejected by that friend repeatedly. Hinata thought, it would definitely not be easy. Ino was thinking similarly. Naruto waited for Hananoki to finish while maintaining a serious expression. Raiden simply gave up after that. Sasuke didn't even attempt to defend himself when Raiden attacked him, suggesting that he had lost his will to fight. Sasuke had lost Raiden's respect and any remaining sympathy in the process, Hananoki concluded. "However, what were you expecting?" Hinata nodded, agreeing. "I wouldn't think it'd be very hard to lose your fighting spirit in the face of such a tragedy," Ino said, now more inquisitive than angry. "But isn't that all there is to it?" Naruto said abruptly, glancing first at Ino and Hinata before turning to face Hananoki, who had an almost expectant expression in her ocean blue eyes. "When I first watched Raiden fight, I knew he would be a well-trained opponent who could hold his own against me for a lot longer than most. Raiden and I are a lot similar than I first thought," the crimson-eyed boy started. "But when I actually fought him, I found someone who shared my beliefs and wasn't just a worthy opponent. For him and me, fighting, being a warrior, a ninja, or whatever, isn't just about being famous or doing a certain task. It's a way of life." I believe Raiden was more hurt than first believed when Sasuke, who he had thought was so much like himself, someone who lives the life of a warrior, ceased fighting. Naruto concluded his speech by saying, to Raiden, "Without one, you can't have the other." He had considered Sasuke to be both his best friend and his greatest rival. Why is that? Hinata inquired, still struggling to comprehend the full extent of Naruto and Raiden's passion for combat. "Because we have chosen that lifestyle. And to those like us, you have to fight someone before you can really know them. A person's approach to combat evolves along with their personality." Sasuke finally and genuinely refused to open up to Raiden when he refused to fight. "It must have been a huge insult to an already excruciating injury," Naruto clarified. Hananoki grinned piteously at Naruto's realization, saying, "I couldn't have explained it nearly that well. You really are a lot like him," she said. "Well, it's harder to explain something you don't have very much experience in," Naruto said, raising his right hand to scratch the back of his head as his cheeks began to flush a bit. As Hananoki put it, "Hey, true enough, I suppose." Angry at herself for promoting such a gloomy topic, Ino glanced around at her three friends. She didn't like the solemn expressions on any of their faces. She tried to think of something to make the other members of the group smile, saying, "Hey, why don't we go and show Naruto some more about ninjutsu?" If nothing else, she hoped it would divert everyone's attention from the current situation. "Sounds good to me," Hananoki said, turning to the red-eyed boy and raising an eyebrow. "It would definitely keep them all busy, giving them time to clear their heads and Raiden time to cool down," she said, grinning at Ino's suggestion. He turned to Hinata, who simply nodded and grinned in return, and Naruto grinned back, saying, "As long as we don't have to go over the same freaking stuff again, I think it sounds good." Naruto started to wonder how Raiden was doing as the group left to find a peaceful location to continue tutoring. Tenten always wondered why Raiden had turned down the opportunity to graduate from the academy at the age of 7, which he had received directly from the Hokage, whenever she saw his fighting skills. He smiled and replied, because that doesn't sound as fun as being with you. He then put his hands behind his head and added, besides, Hananoki wouldn't know what to do without me. She remembered the response she had received when she had asked him that question, though, as she always does. Tenten grinned as she recalled the incident, but then frowned when she realized something she had been trying to avoid. She and Raiden had been spending less and less time together, and it was getting harder to find time for the amethyst. I'd wonder when she was the only one sent on missions and training with her squad. What would happen when Raiden graduated and was put on his own Genin squad? Would they drift apart like so many Genin squads did when they all made Chunin? What if he was gravely hurt or worse? Tenten shook herself out of her gloomy reverie and turned back to the Raiden vs Guy match, which never ceased to astound her and her teammates, Neji Hyuga and Rock Lee, as they watched these relatively rare sparring matches between her sensei and her best friend. In light of that, she turned to face her two friends and teammates. Lee was practically jumping up and down, as always thrilled at the idea of being around such strong ninja, while Neji sat with his typical expressionless face fixed firmly in place. Suddenly there was a shout, bolt, lightning release. Tenten's gaze returned to the battle just as Guy was about to jump away from the lightning strike that Raiden had thrown. Tenten couldn't help but smile at Raiden's easy smile, the one he wore when he was happy and having fun, and it's difficult not to be yourself when your friends are happy. As she watched, Guy launched himself at the boy with the amethyst eyes and then launched a barrage of lightning. Fast punches and kicks. Raiden retaliated with almost the same intensity, but she saw that he was still compelled to adopt a more defensive style than he liked. As a result, when Guy blocked one of Raiden's kicks, Raiden took advantage of the moment to launch himself out of melee range, flipping through hand signals as he flew. Assuming it was another of Raiden's ranged moves, Guy quickly closed the distance between the two combatants, determined to disrupt Raiden's jutsu. Raiden, however, had foreseen Guy's thought process and had prepared a suitable jutsu, one that he had made using the knowledge Kakashi had given him regarding the natures of lightning, element chakras. Lightning release. Thunderclap, he exclaimed, spreading his hands apart. After Raiden clapped his hands together in a prayerful manner, a huge dome of electricity burst out of that epicenter right away. Guy was caught in the lightning's field and instantly electrocuted because he had not anticipated a close range, much less unique, jutsu. A deeply hurt, twitching Guy was left stunned and only managed to stand by sheer willpower as the dome held for a good 6 seconds before finally dying out. Raiden wasted no time in establishing his advantage. The young man with the amethyst eyes charged the big man with the bowl cut and quickly punched Guy's face. Then, using his other hand, Raiden struck the older man in the stomach, then swung an uppercut to Guy's chin, and finally, he slammed an elbow into the teacher's chest. Guy then flew into a nearby tree, causing further damage to Konoha's forested areas. Tenten almost burst out laughing when she saw her friend outsmart her sensei, but she restrained herself and just watched with joy as Guy got up and carefully rubbed his injured chest while wearing a big smile on his face despite the pain. I believe I have to give you this match, Raiden. On this lovely day, your youthful strength surpasses mine. Guy cried out, flinching as he slammed his fist into the air. Despite the odd praise, Raiden smiled sheepishly and ducked his thumbs into his pockets. Thanks for the match, Guy, he said. He turned around and waved to Guy's students as he started the walk back to his regular training ground, a thoughtful expression on his face now. He had considered a few ways to modify his first original jutsu and possibly even come up with another. I'm already looking forward to our next spar, he said. After a spar with Guy, Tenten would typically stay and hang out with her team or assist them in training, so he was curious as to why he was starting to leave. Tenten wondered if he was still upset about yesterday's events, since she knew Raiden had not been happy about being kept in the dark about whatever was bothering his best friend. Tenten got up and ran after Guy after he gave her a thumbs up and a megawatt smile, indicating that it was probably time to speak with Raiden. I think we shall retire early today, team, Guy said, turning to Neji and Lee after watching her leave. I have to run an errand, and I'm a little tired from my fight with Raiden anyhow. Naturally, both of you are free to remain and train here as much as you like. Guy's hand rose to absently grasp at his chest, and the Jonin winced at the pain of simply touching the wounded area, and he set off to find Kakashi and talk to him about his younger brother. Maybe he should go to the hospital first to have his broken ribs fixed. Hi, Raiden. Hey, the amethyst. Eyed boy said absently, his thoughts still focused on the possibility of another original jutsu, as he turned to see Tenten running up behind him. However, Tenten didn't appear to notice this because she was still attempting to formulate her exact words. Well, are you okay with this talking? At least it was a beginning, she said. Realizing what this was about, Raiden blinked and became serious, Sure, he said, looking around before shrugging and sitting down against the closest tree. Raiden simply sat with his eyes closed, allowing Tenten as much time as she required, while she sat beside him and tried to collect her thoughts. After giving it some thought, Tenten decided that maybe, in this case at least, discretion was not more important than bravery. On my mission a couple days ago, I made my first kill, she stated. Raiden nodded and opened his eyes, telling her to go on. My first, actually, a few. We had been dispatched to deal with a band of bandits that were destroying communities on the outskirts of Fire Country. We're ninjas, so I'm not sure what I was anticipating. Although we're trained to kill our opponents, I thought we might just stop them. Incapacitate them. We went on the offensive when we got to their camp, she added, her hazelnut eyes welling with tears. When a few of them noticed us approaching and gestured toward us, my training simply took over. My kunai protruded from a vital organ on each of them, and the next thing I knew, they were all dead. My body moved on its own, training to launch my weapons at as many bandits as I could see, while my mind froze at what I had just done. My body just moved on its own, like some sort of weapon, she said, sobbing openly. Even though I detested what I was doing, I was unable to stop. Are all ninjas expected to be like that? Are lords and nobles supposed to use us as chilly, heartless tools? Tenten leaned against Raiden and sobbed deeply into his shoulder as she felt a consoling arm encircle her shoulders. After Tenten had calmed down a little, Raiden said softly, in answer to your question, yes. Ninjas aren't supposed to feel, he explained, glancing into Tenten's shocked hazelnut eyes. We're not supposed to care about the people we kill, he said. You know what, though? I think I'd only be upset if you came to me and said that you didn't care that you'd made your first, several kills, he said, moving the hand that wasn't holding Tenten's shoulder to wipe a few stray tears from her face. The fact that you care just means that you're still human, Raiden said, beaming as warmly as he could at his friend. If that were ever to change, I personally would have to protest. Tenten leaned her head back on the amethyst-eyed boy's shoulder and silently thanked him for his support, finding a smile on her face despite herself, as well as a blush, which she had rarely seen on Raiden's face before and which looked good. Perhaps all she wanted was a reason to keep his arm around her for a little while longer. He refused to back down and concentrated on reshaping his chakra. He was aware that his time would be limited. Naruto didn't dodge the barrage of kunai that swarmed at him from the surrounding trees. Instead, he allowed each one to strike its target. Naruto's image exploded into smoke after turning into a pincushion, and a log laden with kunai took the place of his real body. From behind one of the trees enclosing Training Ground 7's clearing, the real Naruto emerged. His red eyes betrayed his excitement at his ninjutsu development. He had struggled most with the Kawarimi of the 3 fundamental, academy-level techniques. Raiden's easy smile was slightly brighter than usual as he walked beside Tenten, who simply smiled at the warrior with the blonde hair. Not bad, Raiden said. Hananoki added, I think he's got the basics down pretty well, as she and Ino and Hinata walked up. Naruto gave his 5 friends a smile. I've only been here 3 weeks, but already I've made a ton of friends, he thought. This location is fantastic. Back in the West, he had not made many friends. That gets a little tricky, of course, when you're being trained by a professional demon hunter for the great majority of your time, however, still. His thoughts were interrupted when another person charged into the clearing. Tenten, Neji said impassively as usual, we have another C-rank mission. He saw his teammate instantly become more serious. Whatever the mission was, he hoped in silence that it would not upset her as much as the last one had. Whether he would formally acknowledge it to anyone or not, the reserved Hyuga thought of the girl as a friend. Somberly, Tenten said, all right. She turned to face Raiden, who placed a comforting hand on her shoulder and gave her a replica of the kind grin he had given her a few days prior. She inhaled deeply, returned the smile, and ran off with Neji. When she was out of sight and hearing, Raiden said, hey, Hana, as his amethyst eyes watched her leave. He asked, do you think she'd like it if I took her out to dinner once she gets back? After the girl in question gave him a curious look. I think she'd love it, Hananoki said, barely holding back an excited squeal as she took in a delighted gasp. Her eyes, which were usually warm, suddenly took on a malevolent sheen that caused Raiden to unconsciously shudder in fear. Of course, we'll have to make sure you know where you'll be taking her, she said. Raiden got another shiver and a perplexed expression. She's right, Ino purred next to him in the same tone, and you can't wear just anything if you're going to be taking a girl out to dinner. The gleam that had appeared in Hananoki's ocean blue eyes was still present in Ino's crystal blue eyes when Raiden turned around. Before he realized what was going on, The two girls had grabbed hold of his arms and were dragging him back toward the village while they laughed at a joke that only they could understand. Even though Hinata had no idea what was happening, she started to follow before realizing something was wrong, dismissing it as normal girl behavior. She turned to look around and saw that Naruto was no longer there. He had noticed that everything smelled very different in Konoha than it did back home when he had first arrived. There was an odd smell to the places, the people, and even the air. Naturally, he had adopted it quickly, but there was something that had perplexed him ever since. The scent that had been fairly common in the West, which he had only just noticed a minute before, had not been present in Konoha at all. He detected a demon's scent. Reaching up, Naruto grasped the force edge hilt, which he always carried with him outside of the academy in case something similar occurred. Since some demons tried to lead normal lives in the mortal world, he assumed it might be a friendly one, but he reasoned that it was better to be safe than sorry. Naruto came upon a tiny lake in the forest and found his prey, 2 scarecrows. A couple of bags would be far less than what Naruto thought was a respectable fight. He frowned in disgust. In addition, the items were simply disgusting. Disappointment gave way to the sense of duty Dante had ingrained in the red-eyed youth as he eyed the big, patchwork bags that each contained a colony of hive-minded insects and had a sickle blade as an appendage. Raised as a demon hunter, Naruto would be damned if he allowed a few demons to escape simply because they weren't capable of putting up a good fight. Before either of the scarecrows had even realized the demon hunter was coming, the first had been smashed. The patchwork sack had exploded into a haze of bug guts and the vile stench that came with them with just one thrust from Force Edge. Force Edge cleaved the scarecrow in vertical halves before the second could even bring its blade arm to bear. Just like the first demon, the 2 pieces exploded. Naruto put the sword back in its makeshift sheath after shaking the green ichors off his blade. Naruto stood before the water, trying to figure out what exactly had brought the scarecrows to the middle of the forest. The demons had appeared to be looking for something, even though they were essentially mindless murderers. Naruto turned just in time to see Hinata appear as he sensed an approaching presence. With a bewildered expression on her face, the bashful Hyuga gently landed in front of him. Naruto said, "Hey, Hinata," in a casual manner. With a noticeable lack of stutter, Hinata said, Naruto, what were you doing out here?" Waving the question away, the red-eyed warrior said, "It's kind of a long story. I'll regale you sometime. For now, we should be on our way back to town, village, or whatever." After observing Naruto start to walk back towards the village proper, Hinata shrugged. She couldn't expect him to tell her everything, could she? They had only been acquainted for a week. Tenten left the Hokage's office with her team in silence. Their new task was to find and eliminate a sizable band of bandits who had camped close to a relatively helpless village. Unfortunately, the fact that she had previously been able to do it still made her uneasy. Could she possibly handle more blood on her hands? "Ah, it is good to see you again, Kakashi," her sensei said, interrupting her thoughts. She had always liked Raiden's older brother, so she looked up and grinned at the one-eyed Genin. He returned the smile, then turned to face Guy more gravely. As his students realized what he was getting at, Guy said, "You 3 should go get packed. We'll meet at the gates in 30 minutes. After giving a quick nod, Tenten, Neji, and Rock Lee went downstairs. Tenten was about to descend when she heard Guy ask, "Raiden?" in an odd tone. The young girl paused, suddenly quite interested. To which Kakashi replied, "I think you're right. I sparred him a couple days ago. My shoulder's still sore. I moved to dodge one of his kicks, but he was faster than I'd anticipated. Too fast. My shoulder nearly shattered when he hit it." With a knowing tone, Guy questioned, "He didn't notice, did he?" "No, he didn't. If I hadn't suddenly remembered an errand I needed to run, he'd have kept going like nothing happened," Genin said with one eye. Tenten was now perplexed. Not only was Raiden breaking bones during battle, but he wasn't even aware of it. That sounded nothing like the friend she knew. Even though he takes spars seriously, he took care to avoid hurting anyone too badly. There was a pause, and then Guy asked, "Any particular reason you can think of?" Tenten could picture Kakashi saying, "Nope. I think all we can do at this point is be extra careful when we spar with him," while raising his hands in frustration. "You're right, it's still very strange. Perhaps it has something to do with his origins," her sensei said, heaving a sigh. "His origins? Tenten idea. That'd be my guess," concurred Kakashi. He exhaled. "Honestly, kid shows up in a lightning bolt, exhibits extraordinary ability with lightning jutsu, of all things, and then starts having unexplainable, unnoticed, and decidedly short-lived power boosts. Why's he gotta be so much trouble? Well, that's the price of having people who are precious to you, my friend, Guy said, laughing and giving the one-eyed Jonin a shoulder clap. The reply from Kakashi was, hey, suppose you're right about that. Tenten practically ran down the stairs as soon as she heard her sensei start to walk in that direction. She didn't want Guy to find out that she had been listening in. Something about how Raiden showed up in a lightning bolt was something she couldn't help but wonder they had said. How could they have interpreted that? After an hour of looking, Naruto and Hinata eventually found the others at a posh-looking clothes store in the village's market area. Leaning heavily against a wall close to where Hananoki and Ino were searching through the shirt racks, Raiden appeared more worn out than Naruto had ever seen him. They already had a few different shirts, a pair of shoes, and multiple pairs of pants. With a sly smile on his face, Naruto asked the boy with the amethyst eyes, so, how ya doin'? Naruto still had to suppress a shudder when he recalled the one and only time he had gone shopping with Lady, the female demon hunter he and Dante had met in the Temen.ni. Guru. Raiden eyed the smirking Naruto and said, well, in an irritated tone, I've been to more restaurants today than I knew existed in Konoha, and I think I've spent more time shopping for clothes today than I've ever spent in my entire life. How do you think I'm doing? Fantastic. Naruto laughed as he ducked under the unexpected blow and landed on the wall directly next to Raiden. Raiden let out a weary sigh. Hinata laughed at the boy's mischievous behavior. The two had become best friends in a very short period of time. But if it weren't for the excited smiles that came across their faces, you would think they were fierce rivals based on the way they battled. When the young Hyuga considered that, her smile faded a little. For most of the previous week, she, Ino, and Hananoki had been either teaching Naruto the fundamentals of ninjutsu or simply observing the boys sparring. In the end, she had neglected some of her own training to spend time with her new friends, though she wasn't sure about Ino and Hananoki. Hinata thought grimly, not that it matters very much, it's about time you showed up. You've gotta help us get this guy something nice to wear, Ino said, almost shouting, Hinata, before rushing over to the bashful girl, grabbing her arm, and dragging her to where Hananoki was waiting. In their efforts to elicit an opinion from the poor girl, the two shoppers virtually buried Hinata in a mountain of clothes, causing Raiden and Naruto to perspire. Raiden said gravely, this won't be over anytime soon, will it? Nope, reassured Naruto. The group of five finally left the store almost 2 hours later. Both Hananoki and Ino appeared incredibly proud of themselves. Hinata appeared somewhat worn out, Raiden appeared completely worn out, and Naruto appeared to be barely holding back a fit of laughter. The amethyst-eyed fighter had been forced to try on 17 different outfits by the girls. He ultimately bought 3. He was required to get a variety by the girls. He couldn't wear the same item twice in a row, after all. Silently, they all made their way to the Hitaki residence in the southwest corner of the village. Painted white, the simple two-story house was likely a tribute to Kakashi's father, the White Fang. Raiden said, give me a minute, as he entered the room to put his purchases away. So, what are we gonna do after this? Asked Hananoki after a brief pause. Naruto proposed, I say we go back to training, with a foxy smile, he added, after all, I haven't seen what you three can do yet, while glancing at the girls. The three women all blinked in surprise. Are you serious? Ino asked reluctantly, terrified of the response. Of course, said Naruto with a smile. The amethyst-eyed ninja.to.be appeared to be more of an anomaly than the norm, but he still didn't think they would be as skilled as Raiden. Furthermore, they were his friends, and he would stop at nothing to improve their lives if he could. Hananoki looked at the other two to get their opinions before saying, I guess I don't mind showing off a bit. She did her best to avoid a smirk from appearing on her face. All right, I'm in. I just hope you're not expecting me to start throwing around lightning bolts, Ino said after taking a deep breath. Hinata took the longest to respond, but she eventually nodded her agreement after about a minute. He shouted at one of the house's upper floor windows, great, now we just need Raiden to hurry up and get back down here. As his vision returned to normal, Raiden believed he heard someone shouting for him, but he chose to ignore it in favor of using a small amount of carefully applied chakra to try to calm the pounding in his forehead. Lying on his side, he gazed at the dust bunnies beneath his bed. As he got to his feet, he thought groggily, I should get a broom in here. Raiden walked to the bathroom after performing a quick examination and concluding that the only issue was the throbbing in his head. He went to the sink, sprayed himself with water, and looked in the mirror. Despite having visions for the past few months, he was still unable to identify what was wrong with him. Occasionally, he would start to see things in a completely different way. It all just seemed to come together. All of the hues and forms of the surroundings would start to meld together, creating something that just seemed right rather than an unsightly patchwork of haphazard paint jobs. Even though it was an incredibly lovely sight to see, he could never cope with it. His severe pain from the visions was a major distraction when he was trying to talk to someone. Fortunately, he was usually able to sense when one was about to happen, so he always made an effort to avoid being around people before the full force of the vision could hit him. However, he had never before been rendered unconscious by the visions for a prolonged period of time. Is it possible that they are becoming worse? The idea made him snort. Raiden assumed that the unknown factor was the worst aspect. He had not yet visited a physician, of course, but it didn't seem like a condition that a physician could manage. Raiden decided he was sufficiently awake and pain-free after a few more water splashes, so he went back out to rejoin the group. When Raiden eventually left the house, Naruto yelled, "Took you long enough. What did you do, take a nap?" His easy smile remained firmly in place as he answered, "I sure did. Why, are we doing something else? We're gonna work with Ino, Hinata, and Hananoki. I still haven't seen any of them fight outside of the Academy's short spars, Taijutsu matches," Naruto said, frowning for a minute before his previous smile reappeared. "Come to think of it, I haven't seen much of what Ino or Hinata can do." "Hana, however," Raiden said, smiling at his old friend after gaining a thoughtful expression for a moment. The girl simply returned the smile. Kakashi and Raiden had been instrumental in her training, with their assistance in her training, and Kakashi's Genin level access to the more fascinating scrolls kept in the Konoha library. She had discovered her areas of expertise, even though she didn't think she would ever be as skilled as the Hokage brothers. Hananoki was eager to see Naruto's expression. Before they started their pseudo spar, Naruto encouraged Ino with a smile across the clearing. Both Ino and Hinata had expressed skepticism about their fighting skills when the gang first arrived at the clearing, each stating in their own unique manner that they needed to work a lot of labor. Naruto made the decision to give their actions some structure. He and Raiden, who would watch from the sidelines, would evaluate the girls' performances after splitting the matches into 3 segments each rather than having all-out sparring. The two warriors would then try their best to help the women with their issues. Naruto turned to face Raiden, who had managed to obtain a pencil and a notepad for taking notes. The warrior with the scarlet eyes blinked but remained silent. Part 1. Taijutsu, Raiden said. The match ended quickly, and Ino's understanding of Taijutsu was entirely based on the fundamental academy style. She wasn't very good at it, either. Raiden wrote, "Needs work," under the Taijutsu category on his page. Ino. A ton of work. Part 2. Range, he cried. Although she wasn't very good with projectiles, her aim wasn't nearly as poor as her Taijutsu. She had, however, at least stopped some of Naruto's gunfire. After making a few notes regarding her throwing speed and general technique, Raiden exclaimed, Part 3. Jutsu. Mind transfer, yelled Ino as Naruto saw her instantly form a trapezoid with her thumbs and the first 2 fingers on her hands. The moment Naruto sensed a presence invading his mind, his consciousness was pushed back, and Ino's mind took over as his body's controller. Ino exclaimed, "Haha, it worked," inside Naruto's body. Raiden raised an eyebrow, a little taken aback by the method. Raiden had heard about the mind affecting jutsu of the Yamanaka clan from Kakashi. However, it wouldn't be very long if he were correct. Ino blinked in shock at how easily Naruto had banished her from his thoughts, and her body rocked back. In an attempt to get rid of the strange sensation of having someone else inside his head, Naruto shook his head. "That's a pretty cool technique. What else ya got?" he asked, smiling at Ino. She looked very sheepish and flushed as she said, "The academy ones are the only ones I have." With a somewhat somber expression, Naruto nodded. It would take a lot of work for Ino. He glanced at Raiden, who simply nodded before completing his task. After Hinata and Ino switched places, Raiden quickly declared, Part 1. Taijutsu. After about 40 seconds of fighting Hinata and her peculiar fighting style, Naruto yelled, "Stop." Fearing what lay ahead, Hinata froze in place. Naruto questioned, "Hinata, why do you use that style?" "It's M.My family's S. style," the Hyuga girl said softly, blinking, almost cursing herself for her feeble stutter. With her new friends, she had finally begun to move past it, but now that Naruto was going to chastise her. "But it's all wrong for you," the warrior with the red eyes said. Hinata blinked once more. That was definitely not what she had anticipated. Raiden interrupted Naruto before he could say anything more, saying, "I think you're misjudging the problem, Naruto." As Raiden stood up to elaborate, Naruto cocked his head in perplexity and then simply moved aside. Show me your stance. Raiden said, looking at Hinata with a calculating expression, and trust me. I've sparred with Neji plenty of times, and I've got a good feel of the gentle fist. As she reminded herself that he and Naruto only intended to assist her, not make fun of her, Hinata gradually lowered herself into the fundamental gentle fist position, waiting for Raiden's critique. Raiden merely gave a nod. Then he punched Hinata out of the blue. Although she eeped in surprise, the girl managed to deflect the blow. I think there's only one thing that's holding you back. You're too strict with yourself, Raiden said, nodding once more. Hinata blinked, perplexed. All I'm trying to do is make sure everything is correct. Isn't that my job? She pondered. It's not something I'd expect the Hyuga clan to really pick up on. They're way too stuck in their traditions and whatnot. Your problem is that you're trying too hard to adhere to the style's forms and movements when they don't really suit your disposition, Raiden said. Hinata was even more perplexed now. My disposition? Of course, said Naruto. He seemed to have had an epiphany of some kind. Raiden said, you see where I'm going with this, don't you? With a sly smile at Naruto. Naruto simply nodded and smiled, letting his friend go on. Amethyst's gaze returned to Hinata. The style itself doesn't seem to be the problem, it's your interpretation of its movements and stances. You're limiting yourself to the basics on the scrolls you were taught from. Really, you just need to loosen up. Adapt the style to yourself, not yourself to the style. As she considered what Raiden meant, Hinata whispered, loosen up, looking down at her posture. Naruto put his hand on the amethyst, eyed fighter's shoulder and shook his head before Raiden could say anything more. Raiden glanced back at Hinata and saw that she appeared to be thinking deeply. He made the decision to follow Naruto's instincts and wait to see if she came up with a solution on her own. Hinata raised her head, her pale eyes fixed on something determined. She spread out her stance slightly to a more comfortable position, letting her limbs stretch out a bit rather than trying to confine them, and her muscles clearly relaxed. Her next statement was, I'm ready. Raiden simply nodded and returned to his previous position on the sidelines, next to the somewhat bewildered pair of Ino and Hananoki, as Naruto arched an eyebrow and whispered to him, I think she got it. This time, Hinata approached Naruto without attempting to force the movements into their correct form, instead allowing them to flow from her mind to her body. The moves were flowing, lashing attacks that might have been made with a whip instead of solid, forced palm strikes. She felt more liberated than she had ever felt in her life as she changed the strikes to suit her preferences rather than her father's. Hinata was indifferent to Naruto's ability to skillfully block and avoid her blows. After hearing Raiden's words, seeing Naruto's ecstatic smile as she continued to attack him, and hearing Ino and Hananoki's cries of encouragement, Hinata felt as though she had finally been freed from a cage that she had been imprisoned in for years. Hinata's eyes began to well up with tears as soon as she realized this. In just 1 week, she had not only been able to make friends who truly cared about her, but they had also assisted her in shedding a burden of inadequacy that she believed she had carried throughout her life by introducing her to such a basic idea. She was aware that she would never adequately compensate them for it. Are you okay, Hinata? Naruto asked, his voice laced with concern, as he saw the tears in her eyes and abruptly grabbed her wrists to stop her next blow. Almost immediately after he said that, the others were by her side, and they all had similar questions. The Hyuga girl was so moved by the worry in their faces and voices that she started crying. However, she shed happy tears for the first time in her life. They determined that Hinata had done enough for one training day after she had composed herself and given an explanation for her tears, and Hananoki took over. Raiden thought he could give Naruto a friendly warning of some kind, but for a brief moment, his malevolent side overcame him, and he simply yelled, Part 1. Taijutsu. Hananoki chose a slightly less direct strategy than Ino and Hinata, who hurried Naruto. She directed her first blow at the ground below her. The earth was ripped apart by the shockwave she sent in Naruto's direction. Naruto was so taken aback by the slim girl's strength that he could hardly jump to the side in time. Hananoki didn't want Naruto to think about her strategy for too long. She rushed in as quickly as she could and started hitting Naruto with a barrage of strong blows. The crimson-eyed warrior decided it would be a very bad idea to be struck by one of her strikes, so he could only dodge. He analyzed her style during the time he had to dodging and discovered that she was a kickboxer. The only way he could characterize her fighting style was that, like a typical boxer, she kept her fists close to her face when she wasn't punching, but she wasn't against kicking him a few times. Naruto held back his laughter. He had always enjoyed pride in the UFC. Apparently, if you don't use the exclamation point, it's spelled incorrectly. Fights back west. Now, it seemed as though he was a part of one. The degree of danger was the only significant difference. Naruto observed that she was utilizing chakra to increase the force of each blow as he watched each strike as it approached him. She appeared to keep the chakra in her foot or fist, which would likely hurt if released at the wrong moment. However, Naruto eventually grew tired of Hananoki's constant dodging, regardless of how fascinating his skills were. He therefore chose a different strategy. Naruto positioned himself so that his back was against a tree and got ready. He immediately leapt over Hananoki's hard roundhouse kick. In twain, he was able to witness Hananoki's foot breaking the poor tree's trunk by flipping in midair. When Hananoki hurried him again after Naruto landed just as the tree fell, he suddenly realized that she had appeared so awful during the academy's sparring sessions because she felt the need to hold back so much, and it's no surprise. He was able to match the punch with his own because it came in exactly as he had anticipated. A strong shockwave erupted from the point where Naruto's fist and Hananoki's collided. Naruto did not move an inch, but Hananoki, who was unprepared for the unexpected resistance, was flung back from the shockwave's epicenter. Hananoki looked at Naruto suspiciously after putting her feet back on the ground. The crimson-eyed warrior had easily matched her own chakra. Enhanced strength without using any chakra at all. How powerful can he really be? Given Naruto's extraordinary physical prowess, Raiden had even raised an eyebrow. Maybe his peculiar ancestry had something to do with it. Hinata and Ino gaped at the power the ocean-eyed girl had displayed, while Hananoki and Raiden wondered how Naruto had become so fit. Both of them appeared to have a long way to go. While this was going on, Naruto was simply beaming widely at his opponent and silently wishing she wouldn't try to question him about how he had equaled her strength. He had hardly ever lied outright before, and he didn't want to risk failing at answering his friend's pointed questions. Naruto didn't want to discuss his half-demon status with them, at least not just yet. Fortunately for Naruto, Raiden chose to announce Part 2, Range, to carry on the entertainment. Hananoki's throwing ability was completely lacking in comparison to the impressive display of skill she had displayed during the Taijutsu match. Naruto was certain that Hananoki was at least as horrible as he was, even though he hadn't believed it possible. Raiden called Part 3, following the first agonizing minute of witnessing Hana throw ninjutsu. She flipped through 5 hand signs almost as quickly as Raiden could, eager to get away from the embarrassment that was her throwing skill. Earth release. Stalagmite skewer, she screamed, with her hands slamming to the floor. The moment Naruto felt Hananoki's chakra fill the ground beneath him, he was in motion. Soon, he had to dodge a hail of rock spears that were aiming to impale him as they burst from the earth. Or so he thought the jutsu was typically used for. The ocean-eyed girl barely avoided Hananoki's jutsu for a good 30 seconds before raising her hands and flipping through 4 more hand signs. Earth release. Hand of Gaia, she yelled, and this time she buried her right arm deeply in the ground. An enormous hand of rock and dirt sprang from the ground just in front of Naruto, securing the crimson warrior in its vice more quickly than Naruto had expected. Naruto was curious rather than alarmed. He questioned, Gaia? As in, Mother Earth. Of course he knew the name, but he had assumed it was primarily a Western myth. Still, the majority of Westerners were unaware that she was real. From her awkward position a few yards away from Naruto, Hananoki's face brightened. You know of her? Oh, right, you're from the West. She blushed a bit and said, they have a few books on Western culture and myths in the library here in the village. I found myself fascinated mostly with the so-called Greek mythology. When Raiden and Kakashi encouraged me to try and create my own jutsu, this is what I came up with. The name seemed obvious enough to me, even if most won't really get it. She blushed a little more when Naruto gave her a fox-like smile. At Hananoki's nod, Naruto said, it's a pretty good jutsu. But, no offense, it's still not good enough. That's really cool, Hana, he said, glancing at the hand holding him captive. I take it you could crush me if you wanted to, but it'd only be good for single combat, 'cause you look like you're kinda rooted to that spot for the moment. Hananoki was about to inquire as to Naruto's meaning when he flexed and launched himself out of the stone hand with almost no effort. With a start, Hananoki pulled her hand away from the ground and the rock fell to dust. She was looking at Naruto again, puzzled. Not only had he equaled her chakra enhanced strength, but he had also effortlessly escaped an earth element technique. It was already difficult to break stones without chakra reinforcement, so it was absolutely crazy to do it with just physical strength. Who is he? Fascinated by the foreign warrior, the girl with the ocean eyes wondered. Raiden whistled softly from the sidelines. Even made a guy, he was pretty sure, was not as strong as Naruto had demonstrated. He shouted to the competitors, I think that's enough, and stood up. With a sigh, Hananoki collapsed to the floor. she said. Good. I don't think I could have thrown much more at him, after the match was over. Knowing that his friend had been working hard to fix it but didn't have a lot of chakra to spare, Raiden smirked at her. Hey, Hana. How'd you learn to do all that? Was the question Ino and Hinata wanted to ask each other as they walked closer. Well, when I first started training with Raiden and Kakashi, I wasn't any good at anything, the girl said, grinning at the curious pair, but Kakashi, being himself, was able to find ways to help speed up the process of my training. He checked my chakra nature at the same time he checked Raiden's. It turned out that I have a dual nature, earth and water. Water jutsu are fairly easy for me, but, regrettably, most earth jutsu require a lot of physical strength to perform correctly. Regular weight training was our first step, but Kakashi wasn't sure if it would be sufficient. After searching the library for old training manuals and taijutsu scrolls, he eventually came across a set of scrolls authored by Tsunade herself. Every aspiring kunoichi was aware of Tsunade, who was considered the strongest kunoichi in the world due to her status as one of the legendary Sannin, along with her male teammates Jiraiya and Orochimaru. This small revelation caused Ino and Hinata's eyes to widen. The scrolls, Hananoki went on, had instructions on how to use chakra to become inhumanly strong. The training regimen was difficult, she said, shuddering as she recalled the ordeal she had endured at the hands of Kakashi and Raiden. However, I was able to grasp it at last. As she concluded, she smiled sheepishly at the other girls, and it certainly helped with my earth element training. The style I use is from one of the scrolls as well. It was described as one of the best ways to get the most out of the increased strength while still having a semblance of, style to it. As Ino and Hinata asked one after the other, clearly impressed by Hananoki's ability to learn a technique developed by one of the Sannin at such a young age, Naruto and Raiden stood patiently side by side, and Hananoki was more than happy to answer their questions. Since the other members of her team were all close combat specialists, not that she wasn't, she was just far better at long distance fighting than her comrades. Tenten walked at the back of their formation, prepared to use ranged combat to take on any attackers. A few days later, Tenten and her teammates were finally traveling home. They had completed their mission ahead of schedule, so the team was moving more slowly than usual. Guy had not anticipated the bandits' camp being so weakly fortified, and had assumed they would require more time to organize their attack. Tenten wasn't thrilled with the slower pace, even though it allowed everyone more time to rest. It gave her too much time to reflect, and all she could think about was her role in the mission. She had been tasked with eliminating the bandits' sizable patrol group, which had been continuously searching the area for potential prey. Rewind. She circled slowly, staring at the patrol of bandits she had let encircle her, the 20 ill-dressed men all carried a shabby, badly made katana as if they knew exactly how to use it, though Tenten knew painfully well that they didn't, and they didn't need to know that. She only had to dispose of them so they wouldn't reinforce the main camp. One of the bandits uttered in a voice almost as tattered as his clothing, "Looky, boys, to play with, we got ourselves a cute little doll." Raiden's warm smile was clearly visible in her mind, strengthening her resolve as she reminded herself, "I have to kill them. They're the enemy, and it's my job to take their lives. But I don't have to like it. I just have to get it done." The comment didn't seem to have any effect on her other than forcing her to draw the one scroll hooked to the belt she'd strapped on before she'd set out on the mission. She unfolded her scroll slightly, exposing a complicated-looking seal painted on the parchment, and as she did so, she cut her thumb with the nail of her index finger, quickly smearing the blood that swelled from the wound onto the exposed seal, and the scroll burst into a cloud of smoke, briefly hiding the young girl. Each bandit stepped back as the smoke cleared, and they now looked at a rather ominous figure dressed in armor and a variety of weapons. Tenten now wore a suit of armor that her father had forged to resemble the type of armor worn by the samurai of the Land of Iron, except for the lighter material, the dark gray color, and the absence of a helmet. Her favorite weapons were attached to various points on her armor. A composite bow with arrows hung on her back, a wakizashi was attached to her right leg, a ninjutsu was attached to her left leg, a naginata with a slightly shorter handle, about 5 feet instead of the usual 6 to 7 feet, was hooked onto her back, angled to her right shoulder. A pair of short-handled, single-edged battle axes were strapped to her hips. A wakizashi was attached to her right leg. A ninjutsu was attached to her left leg. And the portions of her belt that weren't supporting the axes were covered in pouches that contained a generous amount of kunai and shuriken. Even the bandits, who had never considered themselves great fighters, didn't need someone better to tell them that it was a terrible sign when your opponent wasn't even slightly concerned that all of that gear might weigh them down a little bit. What scared them the most about all of that was that she appeared completely at ease, even content, wearing all of that. Each made the final mistake of their lives after they happened to glance at one another. Tenten's gauntleted hands flung 3 kunai, and 3 of the bandits fell, leaving 17. Her battle axes, Katsu, Rip, and Danpen, Shred, found her hands as she charged, eager to join the fight, and they whirled around Tenten like a pair of dancers, leaving their mark on the battlefield. The axes split open the face of one bandit, severed the head from his body, snatched both arms from another, cleaved their final victim into 6 pieces, and left 13. 2 bandits were given new slits to their throats. One poor bastard was left to bleed out with slashed wrists and an opened Achilles tendon, and 10 more joined the battle. Her wakizashi, Kiritateru, slash, and her ninjutsu, shimiru, pierce, were the next to enter the battle and were far more accurate than their companions. Mayagaru, sword, the bow, jumped to Tenten's grasp eager to aid its friends, its arrows flying straight and true as they always did for the little girl, and before the 7 bandits could register the attack, Mayagaru's arrows hit each in the head, and then there were 3. At last, Tenten summoned her favorite weapon, Eki, war, the naginata. The eager polearm traded blows with the bandits' weak blades a few times, as the 3 had actually recovered from the initial shock of Tenten's unrelenting assault. However, each bandit was quickly defeated by Eki's superior reach and flexibility. The first fell after being slashed across his belly. The second fell after being slashed viciously from groin to chin. And the third died from a straightforward thrust to the heart. Tenten saw her handiwork as she shook the blood from Eki. She had swiftly, effectively, and mercilessly killed all 20 men, and she started to feel sick to her stomach as she stared at the blood and death she had caused. End of flashback. Your concern simply indicates that you are still a human. If that ever changed, I personally would have to object, Raiden reminded Tenten in her mind. The young woman took a deep breath, calming the nausea that had been rising in her stomach at the memory itself, the picture of the amethyst. Eyed boy's smile still vivid in her mind, and the idea of going back to the friend she loved too much to be merely friends gave her a sudden nod, as if she had reached some kind of difficult decision. Tenten prepared herself for what would likely turn out to be the most difficult experience of her life as she and the rest of her team made their way back to the village. She intended to ask Raiden out as soon as she returned to Konoha. The vermilion sword told its master, "You have to focus. You are good at controlling Rudra's winds, but you also need to control the raging flames I control." The aquamarine sword said to the same master, "Agni is right. You can't just concentrate on one of us at a time. Just as you would try to divide your opponents, you must divide your attention in order to fully utilize our power." As he absorbed the advice of the demonic blades, Naruto scowled. Rudra and Agni were both serrated, edged scimitars, with the only distinctions being their distinct color schemes and elemental powers. They were swords of wind and fire, respectively, and one could wield a tremendous amount of power when using one blade at a time, which was Naruto's preferred style. However, Rudra and Agni were designed to fight together, and if one used both demonic swords simultaneously, the power that could be wielded was truly immense. Unfortunately, Naruto simply did not feel comfortable using both of his butterfly swords. In fact, he admired Raiden in part because of the amethyst. Eyed fighter's skill with both of them. Naruto stared at the stack of weapons beside his coat on the edge of the clearing, briefly considering dropping his training with Agni and Rudra to pick up one of the other devil arms he and Dante, mostly Dante, had obtained in the Temen.ni. Guru. Cerberus, the ice element Tri. Nunchaku was always intriguing. Beowulf, the light element set of gauntlets and greaves, fit him quite nicely, and, being a huge rock Dodin roll fan, it was enjoyable to play Nevin, the lightning element guitar, scythe. He dismissed the argument in his mind with a shake of his head. He had already become accustomed to all those weapons, and the only ones he struggled with were Agni and Rudra. Take a deep breath, Master Naruto, Agni instructed the warrior with the scarlet eyes. You must clear your mind of doubts before you begin again, Rudra said. Now, let us go back to the basics, Agni said as Naruto followed his instructions. Naruto braced himself for a long day, fighting the sudden urge to sigh. After a day, Raiden finally caught sight of Tenten strolling through the streets, seemingly lost in thought. Kakashi had informed him that Guy's team had returned earlier that morning, but he had been unable to greet her because he had had the academy. When Hananoki noticed her too, she seized Hinata and Ino by the arms and exclaimed, "Come on girls, let's go, shop, something." With that, Raiden found himself alone. Naruto had, for some reason, excused himself as soon as class ended. After taking a deep breath, the boy with the amethyst eyes approached the girl with the hazelnut eyes. The subject of Tenten's intense thoughts suddenly came into her line of sight and said, worriedly, "Hey, Tenten. How are you?" She looked up at Raiden and said, "I'm okay," without having to try to force a smile. "It was really helpful what you told me the last time. Thank you." Tenten's tone was so earnest that Raiden couldn't help but blush a little. "You're welcome, I suppose. It was really just something I learned from Kakashi," he said. For a moment, they stood silently together, trying to figure out how to communicate their emotions to one another. Tenten was the first to find their voice. "Well, it helped nonetheless, and I'm still grateful," she said to Raiden, her voice beginning to carry a hint of nervousness. Before Raiden could respond, however, Tenten's nervousness subsided as she pushed her typical, tomboyish personality to the fore and declared, "Which is why you're going to let me take you out to dinner tonight." Tenten merely hoped that Raiden would understand what she was saying and not reject her. "I suppose that since I obviously lack much of a choice in the matter, I'll just have to accept your invitation," said the amethyst-eyed boy, who had indeed caught her implication and had taken a few moments to recover from the shock before his warm smile appeared. It was Tenten's turn to blush now, but she kept her tomboy demeanor intact. She could do that after she was safely inside her room. With a smile on her face, she said, "Good, meet me at my house at 7. Tenten continued, "You'd better not be late," as she turned to leave. After that, she went home. Keeping a skip out of her step required most of her willpower. Raiden knocked on the door of Tenten's home, which doubled as a blacksmith shop, at precisely 7 o'clock that evening. He had dressed in one of the clothes that Hananoki and Ino had suggested he buy for the date, a blue long-sleeved tunic with golden straps down the front, black pants, and brown dress shoes, all in a foreign style that was similar to Tenten's. It made great, comfortable, formal wear. He only hoped he wouldn't look overdressed or, worse, underdressed. Fortunately, his dreams came true when the door opened and Tenten emerged wearing a shirt that was similar to her typical pink one, except that it was white with green images of flowering vines stitched into it. She wore loose, fitting pants that matched the shirt's design and color scheme, as well as tan leather sandals. The sight made Raiden flush a little, and he shook himself in his mind and smiled as warmly as he could, saying, "Wow, Tenten. You look fantastic." Tenten blushed now, but she smirked through it, put a hand on her hip, and said, "You don't look half bad yourself." She stepped out of the doorway, took Raiden's hand courageously, and started to guide him to the main market region. Raiden knew this night was going to be fantastic once Tenten's hand had grasped his own. The red-eyed warrior stood on the lake's water where he had seen the scarecrows the day before, and he was intrigued that the demons had been searching the area. He stretched his senses for fun and initially found nothing, but after a few moments he started to feel something, as if it were, perhaps, beneath him. He lowered his gaze, concentrating more intently on the lake and, more especially, its bottom. He had no idea what it was, but Naruto was determined to find out, so he took a deep breath and dove in. There was undoubtedly something at the bottom of the lake. The damned lake was endless, but he persisted in his quest to find the answer, swimming down, down, down a little more, and just swimming down. Eventually, though, he lost the ability to hold his breath and started to suffocate, so he swam frantically for the surface, wondering if he would even reach it in time. He'd been going forever. He was shocked to find that it only took him 10 seconds or so to raise his head above the water. It took some effort, but there was undoubtedly a force at work on the waters themselves, and some sort of power was preventing him from finding whatever was on the bottom, as it was probably supposed to do. He stretched his senses once more after giving it some thought. There was unquestionably a bottom to the lake, and there was unquestionably something at the bottom, so instead he searched the lake's water. What could be worth so much trouble, though, and why would Naruto want to hide something at the bottom of a lake and protect it so thoroughly? With a shake of his head, Naruto returned to the land, clearly unable to solve this mystery. For now, anyway. Tenten was having a great time tonight. She and Raiden had gone to the theater to see a great play that Raiden had heard about. They had walked in the park, and now they were sitting together atop the four faces of the Hokage monument, overlooking the village of Konoha as it was illuminated by the moon and stars. Even better, Raiden's arm was around her as she sat leaning on his shoulder. Yes, Tenten thought, it couldn't get any better tonight. She looked up into Raiden's amethyst eyes as he said, "Hey, Tenten," jolting her out of her reverie. "Why'd we wait so long to do this?" he asked, grinning. Tenten gave him another smile and said, "I have no idea." She briefly thought about putting her head back down, but ultimately decided that it would be better to just stare into his brilliant eyes. With Tenten already a full-fledged ninja, it was hard enough to find plenty of time to spend with her, but as Raiden couldn't take his eyes off her, he thought about the reality of their lives. He would be graduating from the academy by the end of the year, and then he'd be going on missions with whoever was on his team. The risks those missions put them in were also very real. A ninja's next mission could be their last, and he and Tenten might not have another opportunity for a night like this for a long time. Tenten's eyes widened greatly as Raiden's unexpectedly soft lips touched hers, but she quickly accepted the situation with joy and closed her eyes to enjoy the sensation of his kiss. Their lips parted, and she savored the joy it brought her, even though it seemed like the kiss had lasted forever but ended far too soon. With equally bright blushes and bright smiles, the two gazed at one another. Now it can't get any better tonight, Tenten thought to herself. Hinata stood in the center of the Hyuga clan's private training grounds 2 months after Raiden and Naruto had pointed out the mistake in her fighting style. She was waiting for her father, Hiashi Hyuga, the clan's leader, to start her yearly test, and while Hiashi was busy training her sister, 9-year-old Hanabi, he couldn't ignore his less promising eldest daughter because she was still technically the clan heir. Of course, that could very well change. The young girl was benefiting greatly from having friends who supported, encouraged, and even assisted her in her training. For perhaps the first time in her life, she looked at her intimidating father with a look of stern determination instead of a look of dejected resignation. Hinata mentally shook herself from her gloomy train of thought, and with noticeably greater ease than she had ever experienced. Still, she recalled Naruto's words the week before, when she had told him and the others about her, and her fears of upcoming test. You shouldn't worry about it so much, Hinata. You'll do great, and remember, you're just sparring. Losing is just a reaffirmation of what you already know. There's always more to learn. When he said that, she imagined how Naruto had smiled, how Raiden had simply nodded with that same effortless smile, how Ino had embraced her comfortingly, how Tenten and Hananoki had both clapped her on the shoulder, Hananoki's a bit harder, and how Hinata had relaxed inwardly. Hiashi then shot forward. As he approached the gates of Konoha, the guards looked curiously at the tall, young man in an open, white leather duster, complete with mantle, a red shirt, which was fading a bit and starting to lean more toward pink, blue jeans, gray sneakers, and a bowler hat as white as his coat. He carried a silver cane with a small black skull on top that served as a handhold, and as he approached, they noticed his odd eyes, which appeared to be tinted by the golden sands around Suna, the village hidden in sand. When the young man arrived at the gates, one of the guards spoke up and said, "Please state your business in Konoha before entering." "It would be my pleasure, Mr. Obviously. High level authority figure," the young man said in a very sophisticated voice as he stopped in front of the guards and swept his hat off his head, exposing dust colored, neatly trimmed hair parted at the right. He then flourished into a bow. "The desert-eyed man said, it's always encouraging to be witness to such expert security in the village one has traveled so long to find." Before the blinking guard could even realize that he might have been insulted, what a wonderful delight. "The reason I have come all this way to your fine village, my good sir, is to locate an associate of mine," the young man went on, without even allowing the ninjas to register any vocal undertones, leaving the poor guard and his companion with nothing to do but stand there and blink. "You see, my friend abruptly left town, claiming to be going on a job, but I couldn't let him go without some information I found, and more significantly, without him, business simply hasn't been the same," he said with a dramatic sigh. "So, if you'll excuse me, my undeniably skilled friends, I must be off post. Haste," the young man concluded, suddenly smiling at the guards once more. The guards, blinking in bewilderment, could not even consider preventing the eccentric young man from getting into Konoha. Hinata's body jerked into action at the last second, her left arm jerked up to block Hiashi's right-handed palm strike, causing that arm to spread wide, while her own right hand whipped out to strike her father's stomach with a solid blow. Evidently stunned by the surprisingly quick and strong palm strike, Hinata took advantage of the moment to strike Hiashi's chest with another solid blow, which caused the elderly man to stagger back. Hinata was far from done, though, because when she had struck her father, something inside of her had swelled, a feeling so satisfying that she would normally have been shocked at herself. As it was, she only knew that she wasn't done nourishing that feeling yet. She advanced a few paces before launching herself into a flip toward Hiashi, who was still a few feet away. Anticipating that she would attack from that aerial position, Hiashi raised his hand just in time to stop that extremely dangerous, yet cool, wind. When Hinata landed directly in front of her father, who was startled once more, she snapped a double palm into his stomach, causing it to crack like a whip. She was struck by memories of Hiashi scolding her, telling her that she was weak, a failure, and a lost cause, and that she would never be a true Hyuga. More focused on the fight than anything else, she rushed Hiashi as he stumbled back again, not even noticing the sudden, angry frown that appeared on her face. Her palm strike struck a powerful arm, halting the blow cold, but not the kick she delivered to the exposed flank. Her friends had assisted her in discovering her hidden strength, which she had kept hidden from everyone, including herself, despite this man's constant criticism and his insistence that she would never amount to anything and that she was and would always be weak. "I'm not weak," she screamed, then used all of her strength to smash her fist into Hiashi's completely stunned face. Chakra. Filled, that fist sent Hiashi flying across the rest of the training grounds and slammed into the end of the wooden wall. Hinata was suddenly not so interested in the fight. Instead, she chose to gaze in shock at her trembling fist, realizing that sensation within her that had so tightly controlled her movements following those first few moments of the match. Rage at her father, at the man who had so completely robbed her of her confidence, at that man who would beat her nearly uncontrollably and then have the audacity to criticize her for being so weak, when he never actually took the time to train her, was what it was. Her anger started to rise again, but she quickly smothered it when she realized what she had just done. She turned back to her father's bloody face, which was staring at her with a look she couldn't even make out in her confused state at the moment, and she did what seemed to be the best thing she could do. Tears were already welling up in her eyes as she turned and ran as quickly as she could out of the complex. The young man with the desert eyes thought, "Yeah, I'm lost," as he wandered through a much less crowded district than the ones that had come before it. In fact, he didn't see anyone walking these specific streets, and he assumed he could guess why, since each building appeared to be a large mansion or complex of some kind, and he could sense some fairly powerful presences inside them. This probably meant that this was Konoha's famous, or infamous, he wondered, clan district. Unimpressed, the young man snorted. Even so, he was unable to deny that, aside from that, he had no idea where he was, and his associate might be anywhere. Following a brief moment of contemplation, he dismissed the issue. The young man assumed he could use his senses to identify his target in this manner, but the village hidden in leaves was not visually appealing, and he never objected to traveling a picturesque path. The lost young man smiled at the thought of more aimless wandering, but that smile was quickly dashed when he heard a girl nearby sobbing. After a moment of searching, he discovered that the noise was coming from an alley directly in front of him. Hinata had not run far before she felt the need to just collapse and pretend the rest of the world didn't exist, but she had at least managed to guide herself to a nearby alley, where she'd be in relative privacy, and she was crying into the arms she had wrapped around her knees as she sat against the outside wall of an empty, hopefully, building not far from the Hyuga complex. Hinata's tears were finally starting to stop and her thoughts were starting to make sense again, and as they did, she thought about the consequences of what she had done. She had hit her father. However, Hiashi might interpret that as a sign of progress, knowing that cold man. Even more likely, she realized, he would dismiss it as a minor annoyance and never mention it again. Why should he start caring now? She said aloud, sniffling. What initially made him indifferent? In response, a voice directly across from her inquired. Hinata's head jerked up in surprise, staring into breathtakingly gorgeous golden eyes that temporarily contained all of her thoughts before her brain jolted out of its daze. Who a dot are you? She questioned the stranger, who was now seated directly across from her and in a very similar, though more relaxed, position. The young man replied, "My friends call me Malik," with a soft smile and a tilt of his foreign hat in her direction. "Just like my adversaries." He shrugged and continued, "Understandably, of course. My full name is a little difficult to pronounce. And so do those who are indifferent to me. I apologize for intruding, but I find it hard to ignore the crying of a young girl." He looked into her pearl-like eyes for a moment, then his smile grew as he added, "Especially one as beautiful as you." His golden eyes glittered as his smile warmed. This young, and unquestionably handsome, man, this Malik, whom she had never met in her life, had actually called her beautiful. Hinata thought she would faint, but her tear-streaked face quickly heated to heights she had never imagined possible. She blinked a couple of times before realizing that her eyes were no longer watering, and when they weren't in danger of spilling, she turned to face Malik and his kind grin. His smile broadened, and he inquired, "Miss, are you feeling better?" Hinata looked down and straightened her legs after blinking a few more times and wiping her face with her sleeve before saying, "Why? Yes, Thank you." She was at a loss for words, as this stranger had taken her by surprise and, with a simple smile and a few words, had greatly calmed her. My name's Hinata, B.by the W.way, she said, realizing something that led her eyes back to Malik and his intense eyes. Malik grinned broadly and said, "Hinata," after seemingly considering it for a while before declaring, "I like it. A lovely young lady with a lovely name. It's always good to have a name that fits the person." He gave himself a brief nod before snapping his fingers, as though recalling something. I understand that this comes as a bit of a shock, but I doubt you're familiar with a man named Dante, Malik inquired. She blinked away her initial astonishment and answered, Naruto's dad. To be honest, I don't know Dante very well. You know Naruto, though, better yet, I don't suppose you know where he is, do you? The golden-eyed man cried, leaping to his feet and appearing to be about to run off, but he stopped himself and turned back to Hinata. Hinata couldn't help but laugh, and she couldn't help but think this man was charming. Knowing that Naruto and the others were still training, she glanced up at the sky, taking into account the sun's position, and concluded that it was still quite early in the afternoon. With a smile on her face, Hinata said, I think I see Dot can lead you to him. Malik clapped his hands together and smiled broadly, saying, Great. The eccentric young man then reached his right hand down the left sleeve of his leather duster, and proceeded to extract a black, grinning, metal skull about the size of newborn baby's fist. Then, holding tight to the skull, Malik flicked his wrist, causing a silver rod to snap out to arm length. The golden-eyed man set the elegant walking stick on the ground, and then, taking his bowler hat from his head, swept out into a bow as he said, Shall we, milady? He signaled Hinata to take the lead while maintaining the pose. She had to blink away her bewilderment for a moment. How had that skull not caused a single bulge in his sleeve? But after concluding that it was some sort of obscure technique, she smiled once more and started guiding Malik to the training grounds. Hiashi simply had no idea how to interpret it. He had a stack of papers in front of him and a tissue pressed to his bleeding nose as he sat at his desk. He should have been working on the paperwork, but his mind was only on his earlier sparring match. He had never imagined that his ostensibly hopeless clan heiress, Hinata, could exhibit any kind of promise. However, that was precisely what was bothering him, wasn't it? Could it be that he was so unprepared for the resistance that his surprise was the only reason she had overpowered him? Or was she really starting to get better? Maybe he ought to pay a little more attention to what his oldest daughter is doing. Watching the boys fight was always fun for Ino, and it served as a good reminder of how far she still had to go. Another person might have been deterred by that, but Ino only became more determined as a result, and she couldn't really be angry about it because it was thanks to those very friends that she had started to truly concentrate on her training. Though she had mostly thought about how she could improve herself or her training regimen without killing herself, those thoughts sent Ino down a path of introspection, one that she seemed to have been following a lot lately. Today, she started to consider Sasuke as the reason why she had been unable to concentrate on her training in the first place. What had made her so enamored of him before? It had become so obvious to her that she no longer had any sympathy for the unfortunate boy, so why had she become so fixated on him? She tried to recall the first time she had ever felt anything for him, and she eventually found herself thinking about her old friend Sakura. Unexpectedly, Ino recalled that Sakura had mentioned Sasuke's cuteness when they were younger, something that had somehow infuriated Ino. No, it wasn't what Sakura had said, rather, it was more like how she had said it or something. Could it be? Did Sakura's lack of attention to her make Ino angry? That was it, she thought, remembering clearly now. Sakura had begun to talk about Sasuke, how wonderful he was, and Ino, in her childish rage, had said that she liked him too, which had led to an unexpected rivalry between the two girls that had ultimately destroyed their friendship. This brought Ino to a rather unsettling realization. She had never even thought of telling Sakura how she truly felt, and she had become obsessed with the tragic boy simply because she had lost her best friend to a lie and she was desperate to make that loss mean something. Ino felt incredibly stupid all of a sudden, wondering how she could have let herself lose such a close friend simply because she was worried that Sakura would spend less time with her. Nodding to herself, Ino concluded that she had an obligation to tell Sakura the truth, even if she was unable to remove the barriers she had helped create between them. But before she could think of the words she would use, a voice shouted from the other side of the field, Naruto. The sound of someone shouting the name of the crimson-eyed warrior caused both Naruto and Raiden to halt their charges. Naruto turned to face the newcomer and thought, it couldn't be. Actually, it was newcomers. As he had anticipated, his old friend Malik was standing behind Hinata, slightly to the left of him. What the hell are you doing here, Bones? Naruto asked, flashing a broad smile and sheathing force edge before he and Malik approached and gave each other a high five. Well, I was getting fairly bored back in the city without my two favorite business associates, and you can only stare out at those bland buildings for so long, ya know? Malik responded, dismissively waving his hand while laughing at the moniker Dante and his son liked to use for him. So I thought that by coming out here, not only would I get to see my most favorite people, but I'd also get a much needed change of scenery, the young man with the golden eyes said, picking up and spinning his cane. It was mutually beneficial. He had an ulterior motive, but what could Malik, of all people, think is important enough to travel all this way for? Naruto laughed, but he didn't miss the look in Malik's eyes. To be honest, Naruto wasn't entirely certain he wanted to know. Have you seen your father yet? After realizing why Malik was in Konoha, Naruto inquired. Why, no, I haven't. I doubt that I could persuade you to guide me to him. Once more, I'm dying in a very cruel way to my old friend, dramatically, the eccentric man said. As he went to retrieve some of his thrown shuriken, Raiden nodded and grinned back at Naruto, who turned to him and shrugged, adding, I guess we'll continue this a little later. Naruto noticed that Malik's golden eyes were fixed on Raiden with a thoughtful expression when he turned to face him. Malik then shook his head and shrugged, seemingly dismissing whatever thoughts he had been harboring. For the time being, Naruto chose to dismiss it as Malik's typical strangeness. Whatever the informant had to say to Dante was more important. The two made their way back to the village. The young smith couldn't help but think of the person she was creating the new weapon for as each hammer blow bent the heated metal to Tenten's will. Since Guy was away on a Jonin mission, she and her team had been off duty for the past few days, and she and Raiden had been spending as much time as possible together. However, she had realized that she hadn't even begun to prepare a present for Raiden's birthday, so she had turned down the amethyst. Eyed Boy's invitation to join him when he announced that he was training with the rest of the gang, minus Hinata, after the academy let out, claiming she had to assist her father in the shop. Are you going to drag yourself away from the anvil anytime soon? A man's head with dark, shaggy hair and a beard appeared through the forge's door as if on cue. His voice was deep and bass, like. Tenten looked at her father, who was smiling, and smiled back, saying simply, nope. Kenta grinned broadly at his daughter and said, well, don't work too hard, to her. After saying his piece, Kenta returned to the actual shop. After all, Raiden wouldn't want you to end your own life on his behalf. Tenten smiled and laughed helplessly at Kenta's antics, blushing now at the way her father had pronounced Raiden's name, but she was just happy that he was so supportive of her relationship with Kakashi's younger brother. Tenten put down the hammer for a moment, inhaled deeply, visualized what she wanted once more, and then resumed her work. An opened pizza box, which contained only 1/3 of the actual pizza, was left in the center of the kitchen table while Naruto, Malik, and Dante were seated in the Yondime's former home. Malik had said, leave it to Dante to find the one pizza place in the entire freaking village, as soon as he had walked into the kitchen. Now, as Dante said, you really think it's possible? The air was tense and full of serious expressions. Is it possible for Mundus to reach the human world? Definitely, Malik said, nodding. It was one of the reasons Sparta took the trouble to seal the Temen.ni. Guru, strengthening the wall between the human and demon worlds. Malik stopped and assumed a contemplative pose. Dante and Naruto were careful to remain silent so the genius could ponder it again. Perhaps Arkham's opening of that seal weakened the barrier enough for Mundus to gain a firm enough foothold to begin the process, Malik said, raising his head once more. It's also possible that he sensed the fluctuation in the barrier. However, he was unable to pass all the way through because the gate was notably temporary. But this is all just conjecture, he shook his head. All I know is that, for whatever reason, the demons are becoming agitated. It might just be mating season, for all I know. At the last part, he was smiling. For a brief moment, Dante and Naruto were able to lighten the mood with a lighthearted laugh, but they both understood the implications. They had both vowed to help repel the impending attack of the sound and, most likely, the sand as well. All they could do was hope the Prince of Darkness wouldn't reveal his face before Konoha hosted the Chunin exams. However, if Mundus had actually managed to return. You're right, Malik, Dante said, shaking his head. We have no idea exactly what is happening, and without information, we are powerless to act. We'll just have to make do with being extra aware. Naruto nodded his agreement. In the meantime, the white-haired man went on. Why don't you stay in Konoha, Malik? Me and Naruto could definitely use an informed friend nearby. Malik merely smiled. Malik was aware that Dante had already told him why the demon hunter had been summoned to Konoha and that Dante hoped the eccentric with the golden eyes would assist. Naturally, he would also be present to inform Sparta's descendant of any demonic events. And Dante was already prepared with his answer. Dante returned the smile. He said to the man with the golden eyes, all right. We'll go to the Hokage and get him to set you up. You should go back to your friends, kid. They're probably getting bored without ya, he said, turning to face Naruto. Naruto smiled, gave them the peace sign, and walked out of the house. Malik's smile vanished as soon as he heard the front door close. He glanced at Dante and saw the same solemn expression on the demon hunter's face that he was probably wearing himself. Dante, said Malik softly, if it's Mundus after all. The man with the white hair grabbed his friend's arm across the table and said, I know, Malik. If it comes to that, I'll keep my promise. Malik was only able to nod. Hinata concluded the story of her father's test by saying, I just don't know what came over me. The bashful Hyuga sighed. Having someone with whom to talk made problem solving so much easier. Well, from what you've told us about this father of yours, I sure as hell don't blame you for being angry. Frowning, Naruto, who had just returned 10 minutes earlier, said. Naruto had been expressing a strong dislike for Hiashi, even more than the other members of the group, which was saying something, ever since he had heard Hinata's stories about how the man treated her. As the others nodded their heads in agreement, Raiden added, I agree with Naruto, wholeheartedly. Quite honestly, Hinata, I think I can safely say that all of us are surprised you didn't snap years ago. In response to Hinata's curious expression, Hananoki explained, acting like you've got some kind of grudge against the world. Honestly, the guy's got a lot of rage. Personally, Hananoki continued, I'd have expected you to turn out more like Neji. I say you should have hit him a few more times for good measure, Ino said after that. Everyone in the group laughed, including Hinata. Hinata told herself that having friends was wonderful. Dante announced his arrival to the Hokage by saying, Hey, old man, I got a favor to ask ya, as he followed Malik into the Sandame's office. Regretfully, his timing was less than ideal. Again, it seemed that the Hokage was having a conversation with a woman Dante had never seen before. The Hokage grinned in spite of the impolite entrance. In fact, he thought Dante's informality was refreshing. Oh, it's good to see you, Dante. I'd like to introduce you to Anko Midarashi. She was just promoted from Tokubetsu to full Jonin. Anko, this is my old friend, Dante. The kunoichi in question turned to face the demon hunter, and Dante was quite pleased with what he saw. A tan trench coat, a thin chainmail body, suit that stretched from her neck to her thighs, violet hair styled in a spiky ponytail, light brown eyes that were piercing but without pupils, a dark orange skirt, gray shin guards, and a red pendant, all wrapped around a very shapely body of slightly pale skin. But Dante was particularly enthralled with her cheeky grin. A slender hand was extended to the white-haired man, who accepted it right away. Hello, Mr. Dante, Anko said. I've heard quite a bit about you. Glad to see that not all the rumors are baseless. Dante said, and which rumors might those be, Miss Anko? With a raised eyebrow. Wouldn't you like to know? She asked, laughing. Though I don't believe I've heard of your friend, Anko said, glancing sideways. The Sandame's eyes widened in recognition as he finally caught sight of the other man who had joined Dante in the room. Call me Malik, Miss Anko. It is a pleasure to meet you. Malik swept his bowler hat into his signature bow and said, and it is an honor to be in the presence of one so great, Sandame. Hokage. And a second time, at that. A great honor indeed, before turning to face the Hokage and repeating the bow. In response, Sarutobi frowned. He had known Malik for years. In fact, when the Kyuubi attacked, Dante had summoned him to assist the Yondaime in finishing his seal. And he had not changed in the least, as the Sandame could see. I see you despise authority just as much as you did the last time I had the displeasure of meeting you, said the Sandame. With as fantastic a passion as ever, Malik said, clapping his hands together. I apologize, Anko, but could you wait outside for a few minutes? I imagine Dante and his associate have something to discuss with me in private, the elderly Hokage said, letting out a deep sigh before turning to face Anko. Seeing the expression in the Hokage's eyes, Anko simply nodded and left the room, but not before giving Dante a slap on the behind. Dante nearly forgot why he was there as he gazed at the door with a curious look and a slight flush. He sat down in front of the Sandame after shaking his head to avoid the distraction. Malik followed suit, and both of them became very serious. After a brief moment of glancing between them, Sarutobi let out another sigh. Malik was serious, too. This was not going to be good news. He said, "What's wrong, Dante?" The demon hunter and his companion looked at each other and said, "Well, it's a bit of a long story." A half hour later, Kakashi was looking at the three children in front of him who were standing at attention. He asked, "You guys think they're ready?" as he glanced to his left. Hananoki and Raiden both nodded. After giving a nod in return, the one-eyed Jonin produced 3 blank slips of paper and gave one to Naruto, Ino, and Hinata. "All right." Kakashi started out. "Raiden and Hananoki asked me earlier in the week to help you guys with your ninjutsu training, but since I had a mission to take care of first, I couldn't make it till today. But now I'm here, so without further ado," he cleared his throat, That piece of paper you now hold is used to determine a person's chakra nature. I assume you all know what that is. He continued with 3 nods. When I tell you to, I want you to channel your chakra into that paper. We'll see what kind of nature you have by watching how the paper reacts. Now, channel. Hinata's paper became incredibly wet all of a sudden. Ino's was quickly cut in 2. And Naruto's then split in 2, caught fire, and burned to ash. Why am I not surprised? I wonder. Kakashi questioned himself. It was expected that Naruto would have an equal number of natures because he had 2 distinct chakra systems. And he's undoubtedly your son, sensei, because one of them is wind. Given that he had copied a good deal of water jutsu in his time, the one-eyed Genin thought about the girl's slips of paper and decided that Hinata would be the easiest to assist. When Yamanaka decided to practice jutsu outside of their clan techniques, it was quite unexpected because they were typically water-natured. He had only ever heard of Minato and Asuma, so a ninja with a wind nature was undoubtedly uncommon in the land of fire. Alright then, Kakashi said. Hinata, your paper is telling me you're water-natured. Which is good. I'm fairly well acquainted with water jutsu. Naruto, it seems you have a dual nature, fire and wind. I've gathered a nice, sized collection of fire jutsu. Believe it or not, it's almost like we live in a land of fire or something. He looked at the children who were present. They simply gave him a blank stare in return. He sighed and went on. Anyway, it seems you share the wind nature with Ino, and, to be honest, I don't think it'll be much help to you guys in that regard. My experience with the wind element is rather limited. Seeing the sudden sadness on Ino's face and the slight disappointment he saw in Naruto's, he said, but, I do happen to know someone who also has a wind nature. I'll be sure to speak to him about helping you both. This seemed to lift both of the children's spirits. Kakashi glanced at the 3 children before him. The one-eyed Genin told the bashful Hyuga, Hinata, why don't you work with Hananoki for today? She'll get you started with your water manipulation. After giving a nod, Hinata moved to stand beside Hananoki. Ino, I hate to ask this, but do you think you could wait a day? I promise I'll have my friend with me tomorrow so that he can start training you, but I want to get Naruto started with his fire element today. Kakashi apologized. Naruto started to protest right away, saying he didn't want his friend's training to be abandoned for him alone. But Ino interrupted him by saying, sure, Kakashi. Then, without thinking, she turned to Raiden and asked, do you think you could help me out today? Raiden nodded with a knowing smirk, and the others exchanged bewildered looks. Ino quickly followed him as he started to leave the clearing for a more remote part of the forest. Ino wanted her secret project to remain as secret as possible, after all. Sarutobi rubbed the bridge of his nose and thought, ah, here comes that old headache. His work simply continued to improve. After hearing Malik's main theory, as well as several other, less frightening but less likely theories, about the recent surge in demonic activity, he opened his eyes and looked at him. He continued, and so you offer your assistance in our security matter if you're allowed to set up shop here. That way you can warn Dante and me if what you fear proves to be true. All business, for the time being, anyway. Malik just nodded. The Sandaime let out a resigned sigh. Even though he didn't like Malik's personality, he was undeniably a talented fighter with an even more brilliant mind. In the event that sound and sand clash, he could undoubtedly be a benefit to Konoha. He took a folder out of a drawer on his desk and started to look through it, saying, let's see what I've got here. Though there had been some rumors in the streets about a crazy guy opening a strange, cult-like store in the center of the market district. With the Hokage tower in view, Konoha's 2 weeks went by without incident. Several people even reported hearing explosions and other disturbing sounds coming from the building more than once. For those presently seated in the Hitaki household, however, today was a significant day because it was Raiden's birthday. There was a stack of gifts from his friends and guests in front of the honored guest, who was seated at the kitchen table. Tenten had wrapped her gift in a deep purple wrap. Kakashi had wrapped one in blue, and Hananoki had wrapped one in bright green. Hinata and Ino had collaborated to get him one sealed in yellow paper, and Naruto and Dante had combined their resources to give him the red present. Come on, bro, Kakashi responded, don't keep us waiting, the suspense is killing us. With Dante leaning against the wall like that, Kakashi appeared to be the most at ease person in the room, and Raiden looked at his brother doubtfully. However, the boy with the amethyst eyes was the first to reach across the table and take Hananoki's gift. It was a big, square package that was thin but wide. He unwrapped the package. As he gazed at a large painting depicting a nighttime view of a cliff overlooking the dark ocean, he had to suppress his yelling of delight. On the cliff's edge, a lone wolf was howling at the exquisitely rendered moon. Though a quizzical expression was plastered on his face, Raiden's eyes sparkled brightly as he looked up at Hananoki, who was now standing beside him. The ocean-eyed girl asked sarcastically, her eyes glistening with joy, "Have you been in your room recently? It's so bland. I figured you could use something to liven the place up a bit." "Okay, Mom. I'll be sure to hang this up later." Raiden smiled and reached up to embrace Hananoki, who squeaked back twice as hard. Kakashi had to suppress a laugh as he looked around. The others in the room clearly did not understand the significance of Hananoki's gift. He didn't anticipate that Raiden would ever share his small secret with anyone else, but still. Next was Kakashi's gift. It was rectangular in shape and smaller than the previous one. Given its weight and his knowledge of his brother, Raiden was able to guess what it was with some degree of accuracy. When the wrapping was removed, Raiden and his older brother exchanged an especially odd smile. Tenten stared at the small orange book in her boyfriend's hands, then glanced over his shoulder before letting out a dejected sigh. Following his expression of gratitude, to which Kakashi gave him the thumbs up, Raiden proceeded to discuss Naruto and Dante's gift, which was a short, wide, square box. Raiden's eyes widened as he opened it, and Tenten whistled softly behind him. The box contained a polished, four-bladed windmill shuriken that was held in a leather sheath for folding. Raiden picked it up, appreciating its lightweight, sharpened edges, odd seals painted on it, and strength in spite of the metal's apparent thinness. Naruto and his father were alternately gazed at by amethyst eyes. "During my adventures, I've encountered a variety of weapons," Dante informed him. "Never been good at making them myself, but customization has always been a favorite pastime of mine. Been teaching Naruto to do it too." The man with white hair grinned. "Wasn't nearly that light when we picked it up." Raiden just got that foxy smile from his friend with the red eyes. Hinata and Ino's gift came next. It was housed in a box that resembled the previous one in shape but was a few sizes bigger. Raiden was wearing his new jacket about 20 seconds after he had opened it. Even though it fell to the middle of his thighs, the material was lightweight and soft. The kanji for "flash" was embroidered on the back using thread that matched the color of the trim, and it was deep violet in color with gold trim lining the edges. The concessions made for his favorite activity were immediately apparent to the young fighter. The lightweight material ensured that he would only be slightly slowed down. The front was buttonless and zippered to prevent it from closing and obstructing his access to his utility belt, and the jacket, although it hung down quite a distance, did so stylishly and without risk of tripping him up in combat. "So," Raiden said to the room while spreading his arms, "how'd I look?" After a moment of staring at their friend, Ino and Hinata turned to face one another, with Ino grinning broadly and Hinata grinning broadly. After exchanging high fives, Ino remarked, "We rock." "Whoa, did you guys make that yourselves?" Hananoki asked the two, whistling. Ino said, "Yeah, we've been working on it together since you told us about his birthday, on behalf of both lovers." "I tell y'all, I could never have made something like that myself," the brunette said, "but Hinata's a fashion genius." Hinata intervened. Ino, don't sell yourself short. I wouldn't have been able to get it done if you hadn't been there to help. And you're the one who came up with the actual design." Ino waved her hand dismissively and said, details, although she was smiling and blushing slightly. Then there was Tenten's gift, which came last and, although he had enjoyed every other present, Raiden had to confess that it was his favorite. A Kyoketsu shogi, which consisted of 20 feet of blackened chain that connected a hand-sized metal ring with a 6-inch, double-edged blade, was seated in the long container. Raiden had never seen or used a kusarigama in his life. He had only heard of the weapons that existed before the more well-known ones. The idea of a fresh challenge made him smile ferociously. "You like it?" Tenten asked, her arms encircling him and her chin resting on his shoulder. Her boyfriend said, "I love it," and then he kissed her gently on the cheek. She turned slightly and gave Amethyst Eyes a warm smile. Raiden realized he could no longer ignore the tension that was intensifying just between those amethyst eyes. Of course, didn't it have to happen today of all days? Raiden quickly left the room after saying, "Now, if you'll all excuse me for a moment," as he carefully withdrew from Tenten's arms. "I've really gotta use the bathroom." The way Raiden had left the room had been tense, and everyone in the room looked at each other incredulously. Distracted. Even if he did have to answer nature's call, it wasn't like him. "You don't think he drowned, do you?" Naruto replied at 5 minutes after they had given him a minute, 3 minutes, and 5 minutes. Tenten was the only one who did not laugh. Although she couldn't recall any particular instances, she was aware that she had previously seen him in that state. "I think I'm going to make sure he's okay," she replied. As Tenten approached the bathroom door, she became aware that there were no noises coming from it. "Raiden?" She knocked. No answer was given, which was more than enough justification for her to fling open the door and storm in. Blood was dripping from the sink's edge, and a pool of it had formed beneath Raiden's unconscious, face-down head. It was Raiden that she cried. Malik hurried to put on his duster as he climbed out of his basement, his hair still frazzled and his pale face still blackened with smoke from his most recent experiment. He quickly went to his hat rack and tossed his bowler hat carelessly on his head after he had an arm in one of his sleeves. He staggered out the door, still attempting to put his duster on completely, with one hand cleaning his face with a handkerchief that he had found somewhere. "I knew it," Malik declared to the world as he flew through the streets of Konoha, concentrating on a particular energy signature. Raiden's vision returned at last, and he was looking up at a white ceiling he had never seen before. His ascent was stopped when he attempted to sit up, and he was gently lowered back onto the hospital bed's pillow. Tenten whispered to Raiden, "The doctors say you have a concussion, so don't try to move." He glanced over and saw Hananoki and his girlfriend staring down at him with concern. "What happened?" he inquired, his voice a little slurred. The one-eyed Genin stepped up behind the girls and said, "Actually, from the opposite side of the room. We were kind of hoping you could tell us that." A hand as soft as Tenten's had been placed on his shoulder, and Kakashi said, "Do you remember anything? Tenten found you unconscious on the bathroom floor with your head cracked open. There was blood on the sink. We assume where you hit your head." There was a pause, and then Raiden said, "No, his loved ones, however, were obviously too concerned about him to notice the lie." "Then it seems the mystery still remains," exclaimed someone from the doorway and with enthusiasm. Dante, completely bewildered, said to the newcomer, Malik. What the hell are you doing here?" With a hazy wave of his hand, the golden-eyed man pushed past the other people in the room and said, "Don't worry, I'm sterile. I won't be giving him any more infections than absolutely necessary. Now, if I could have complete and utter silence, I will begin my medical examination," Malik said, staring at the prone boy for 5 seconds before announcing, "I have it." He pointed to Raiden and exclaimed, quite dramatically, "This young man has suffered a cranial injury," before anyone could raise any objections to Raiden being infected at all. As the others rehearsed their coordinated face plants, Naruto and Hinata had to suppress their laughter at Malik's antics. "Yes, I see, it's as if everything is blurring together, not chaotically, no, but almost harmoniously, as if I'm beginning to see things as they should be. How interesting," Malik continued once more before any objections could be raised, but this time he looked straight into Raiden's eyes. Malik had just described his visions in perfect detail, clearly on purpose, and Raiden had not spoken to anyone about it, so he had to force himself not to open his eyes and stare at the man in disbelief. With sudden seriousness, Malik turned to face the other people in the room and said, "I'd like a few moments alone with the young man, if I may." "Now hold on," Kakashi said. Before the Genin could finish his tirade, Dante placed a hand on his shoulder. "Kakashi, you can trust him, remember?" Dante said to his companion. "I know he's hard to accept, but he's helped me out of more tight spots than I cared to count. If not him, then at least trust me." After taking a long breath, Kakashi remarked, "Come on guys, let's give Malik some space." Tenten left the room even more reluctantly than Kakashi had, and as she continued to glance over her shoulder, she saw Malik waving goodbye and Raiden glancing at the man with fear. A few minutes later, Malik left the room and said to the group of people waiting outside for him, "Well, that's about all I can do for him. The rest," he said with a dramatic arm sweep, "is up to him." The eccentric man left with a tip of his hat, whispering to himself about experiments and less volatile reactions. Tenten noticed her boyfriend's aloof look as she walked into the hospital room first. She asked, "What did Malik say?" "That I might want to keep from engaging in much physical activity, particularly of the violent kind, until my cranial injury has managed to right itself," he said, his face effortlessly transitioning into a deadpan. "What the hell is up with that weirdo?" Tenten muttered as she shook her head, her expression instantly matching Raiden's. Dante remained close to the doorway, keeping a close eye on Raiden as he extended his arms and subtly repositioned his pillow. The demon hunter observed that it appeared as though there was something, possibly a book, under the pillow. Dante fought the urge to sigh and reminded himself to have faith in Malik, as he had previously told Kakashi. Dante didn't need to know what was happening with the child if his old friend wasn't telling him. Unfortunately, knowledge didn't make the ignorance any less annoying. A few days later, after Kakashi had gotten a real med.nin to look after his younger brother, Raiden was discharged from the hospital. He and his friends were reminded the following day at the academy that hard work would be essential to success and that graduation was just 4 months away. The friends smiled at one another and essentially laughed off Iruka's remarks. They were best at diligent practice, after all. For the busy group of friends, 4 months passed quickly, and graduation arrived and passed more quickly, and much more easily, than any of them had anticipated. At the moment, Naruto sat between Hananoki and Raiden, thinking about the latter's recent actions. Raiden had been spending a little more time alone than normal ever since his birthday. Naruto suspected Malik had done more than simply tell the young man with the amethyst eyes to rest, but when he brought it up to the eccentric man, Malik advised him to give it time, and not worry about it so much. God damn it, what time? He continued to wonder. The others had also noticed a slight change in Raiden's behavior, but they had all agreed that he would definitely bring it up with them if he had a problem that he couldn't solve on his own. Thus, they gave it up. Naruto detested revealing secrets. Like the fucking lake. What was causing the power in that body of water was still a mystery to the crimson-eyed warrior. He had again brought it up to Malik, but after looking at the lake for 10 minutes or so, all he had said was, "Whatever's down there obviously wants to be left alone. Best to give it what it wants." Malik had not mentioned the matter again, which made Naruto furious. Naruto pushed his thoughts aside and glanced around the room. Since the graduation test was so easy, he took the time to find out who else had passed. Sasuke, the emo kid, his annoying pink-haired fangirl, who gave Ino strange looks. He noticed them and put the information away for later. The smelly dog guy, the really lazy kid who always dozed off in class, the fat friend of the lazy kid, the creepy, silent, sunglasses-wearing kid, and the stocky, red-haired guy Naruto had watched defeat Raiden on his first day at the academy had all passed. The crimson-eyed warrior then thought about his female friends, each of whom had experienced some changes in the previous few months. In addition to wearing a sky-blue, sleeveless shirt with green leaves falling sporadically around the shirt, a light green skirt with blue waves tossing about the bottom that reached just above her knees, dark brown leather boots, and gloves of the same color, Hananoki had allowed her mahogany hair to grow out until it reached her shoulder blades. Although Ino didn't look any different, she now exuded confidence and maturity greater than before. Naruto hadn't witnessed her flirt with a man since his 5th week in Konoha, and she no longer fawned over Sasuke. But Hinata had undoubtedly been the one who had changed the most. Even though she was still extremely shy, she was able to speak without stuttering and exuded her own quiet confidence. The Hyuga girl's changes didn't stop there, though. She had begun wearing her hair up in a high bun, a loose white t-shirt with a single blue rose embroidered on the front, navy blue jeans held up by a black belt, black leather guards that completely covered her forearms, and black shinobi sandals. The door opened and Iruka entered before Naruto could think of anything more. "Congratulations to all those who managed to pass the exam," he said. The scarred man then went on to give a dull lecture about ninja responsibilities and other topics. However, the classroom erupted as soon as he said, "I will now announce your 3-man Genin cells." Naruto and Hananoki turned to face the stocky, red-haired boy. First, on Team 7, Naruto, the crimson-eyed warrior said, raising an eyebrow. Hananoki, they both high-fived, and Jose. His expression was serious as he nodded to the two of them. The dog boy looked rather indignant, the sunglasses guy sat there as silent as ever, and the pink-haired girl responded with a wail about not being on Sasuke's team when he said, "Next Team 8, Kiba, Shino, and Sakura." Team 9. Raiden, perked up the amethyst-eyed ninja, Hinata, they grinned at each other, and Sasuke. Raiden blinked, turned to face the final Uchiha, and muttered, "Fuck." The blonde girl couldn't help but sigh when she heard the words, and finally, Team 10. Ino, because she knew what was about to happen. Shikamaru, and Choji. When Ino turned to smile at her father's friend's sons, she discovered Choji trying to wake a sleeping Shikamaru. She let out another sigh. "Now all that's left for you all to wait for your respective senseis," Iruka said. He said, they should be along momentarily. He then departed, leaving the 12 children to savor the unexpected quiet.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.